We are having a problem if a company like GE wants to make an investment for industrial goods. We grow a lot in the consumer goods, but we grow very limited in industrial goods. Producing generator, for example, for power generation, producing spare parts for industrial machineries. We are not competitive enough compared to our neighbors. I mean, I don't have all of the data for Indonesia, but this is the real example that I have, when I do my job. So a couple of years ago, we have to make the decision that we have to build generator for wind turbine in Vietnam instead of in Indonesia because of 3 reasons. Number one, we have lack of, highly skilled labor. Number two, because cost of logistic it's too expensive. Jadi barang keluar dari pabrik itu masih kompetitif compared to the other countries. But if you talk about total product, if you want to export it, and then the cost become very expensive. And we are not competitive. Number three, because of the bureaucracy for, setting up a manufacturing in Indonesia. We were crying at the time. The Indonesian team, kita frustrasi sekali, kita menangis because we thought when we talk about the power generation market, Indonesia is the biggest in the region. But the reality is industrial market needs not only local market. Industrial product that we manufacture in Indonesia need export market, which means we have to be competitive compared to the other countries. If you are talking about consumer good manufacturing, it is not an issue because the domestic market is enough to capture all of the product that we can produce here. But if we want to manufacture, for example, automotive, if we want to manufacture spare part for aircraft engine, if we want to manufacture, and the other problem that we are facing is the supplier that we have to supply the raw materials, we don't have at the quality, highly skilled labor and need the capability to do export market, which means we have to be competitive compared to Vietnam, compared to Malaysia, compared to Thailand and other countries. First point. Second point, about the job itself, the capability of laborers in Indonesia. Unfortunately, if we are talking about higher level job, either it is in manufacturing or in management, we have a very small talent pool. Every multinational company will compete for the same talent pool. And now that talent pool also, being approached by startup companies. So GE, in this case, we compete with Grab, we compete with Gojek, we compete with Blibli.com to get the best talent. And unfortunately, the education process that we have, not creating the global talent leaders. And it can be seen in the score of Global Talent Competitiveness Index. I think every year INSEAD launched that index. And Indonesia still on the top below. We are probably ranked 90, or probably now increased to 80 out of 110 countries. And that creates the question of what will be happen when the demographic bonus, like what people say, yang digembar-gemborkan itu, coming in 2025. If the demographic bonus generate the medium and low skill labor, we will still become an object of globalization. We are not become the subject of globalization. We will not take most advantage of having the demographic bonus. So what we need to do in this second point is we need to promote and produce more vocational schools. People who are specifically trained and educated to do the job of a future. Because manufacturing will change a lot in the upcoming 5 or 10 years. We will have the 3D printers, which revolutionize the manufacturing activities, which require the design capabilities. We are not having design capabilities good enough at this time. While we have the potential for it. A company in Salatiga, for example, they are focusing on design. They are recruiting people from vocational school. They educate people who not graduated from the university to do the design that can relate it to the additive manufacturing, which is the 3D printer, and they export the product. So we need more company like this, the tech engineering. So that's number one. Again, if I may recall, manufacturing need to focus on industrial good and need to be more competitive and need to go for an export market. Number two, we need to focus a lot on vocational skills, on vocational schools, and creating labor with vocational specific capabilities. My last point, the future of job. The future of job will be changing dramatically. Some of job for sure will be eliminated, for sure. In every revolution, a lot of job eliminated. Repetitive job will be gone because it will be easily replaced by robot. Repetitive job will be replaced by machine. But interestingly, and this is the study coming from McKinsey, in every revolution of technology, there will be more job created versus job eliminated. The question is, what kind of a job? If it is low and mid-skill job, and then it will create the same situation for Indonesia. Digital era, IoT, big data, or whatever, create more jobs, which is the object driver. Low skills, not create the growth that what we want. So if we are not going up, focus specific into the next technology that will come, robotic, big data, IoT, we will just get the advantage very low from this future of jobs. There will be more jobs, but people need to upgrade their capability into a job that what we want. So those are the three things that I can share with you. Hopefully it can be something that, you know, we can discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mas Henry. Before you go, I would like to ask, like, GE abis itu ngapain aja dong? What do you do as a company to improve the talent that you mentioned 3 times already that you need a high-skilled labor. So what do you do at GE?
We have manufacturing of what we call the Christmas tree. This is, you know, equipment that you put under the ocean when you lift up the oil. And this is very high precision equipment. We manufacture 99%, we manufacture those products 99% by the Indonesians. So in some area where we are involved, that we can involve in the technology, we mempekerjakan mereka, we hire them and we educate them. This year we're gonna focus on vocational schools. We make a promise to the government that we will focus on vocational schools, especially on the additive manufacturing. The systems, how does it work? We still work on it. But we have the additive manufacturing business, which is the 3D printer, and we want to create the vocational school in Indonesia.
So before we proceed to the second speaker, what kind of ecosystem do you need from the government, let's say from regulation point of view, to make this manufacturing industry work? Then jadi we're not, you know, lacking loads of high-skilled labor.
I think some perangkat ya, some aparatus sudah dikeluarkan. There are regulations that the company who involved on developing vocational school will get, you know, benefit from the tax. Will get a benefit from, you know, other investment climate and those kind of things. But these vocational schools activities need to be the national movement, which involve not only Departemen Pendidikan, but involving multinational companies, local companies, NGOs, gerakan-gerakan yang ada. I think every multinational companies need to require to have 1 or 2 vocational school activities.
Cannot be just you. Yeah. Oke, terima kasih Mas Henry. Next is Madam Glenys Thornton, please. So we have a timer, and also Mas Heri will be there as a timekeeper.
Thank you very much. Well, guests, fellow social entrepreneurs, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here at the Indonesian Development Forum 2019. I'm immensely flattered to have been invited to attend and thank the British Council for making this visit possible. I've been tracking with interest and delight the progress of social enterprises and social entrepreneurship in Indonesia for several years, and indeed met several Indonesians who've come to the UK to talk about social enterprise. And I read with envy the words of the Minister that the policy aim of creating an enabling environment in the report which was commissioned by the British Council and done with Social Enterprise UK and the Indonesian government and published in December of last year about the state of social entrepreneurship and social enterprise in Indonesia. I've been actively promoting social enterprise and cooperatives in the UK for most of my life. It's been my privilege to work with the British Council and Social Enterprise UK over this time to support the development of social entrepreneurship and enterprise in both the UK and across the world. And I take as my starting point that, and I quote, "The Indonesian government aims to be an active partner of social entrepreneurs and is committed to building and nurturing social entrepreneurship ecosystem." Frankly, I would have loved to have heard those words from the British government 20 years ago when we were starting our journey of raising awareness of the value of social enterprise in our society. And I'm always enriched by the learning I gain from you and your experiences, and I profoundly believe it is not my job to tell social entrepreneurs, social enterprises, or the Indonesian government how to move forward. But I am confident that exchanging our experiences will help. So I salute the fact that the research shows that social enterprise represents a strong and emerging part of your economy. We know that our starting point is a joint vision of a more equitable and just society which values and actively supports and empowers individuals and communities to seek to engage in entrepreneurship for social benefit. So I believe a social enterprise ecosystem which creates the jobs that we've been talking about today needs two key ingredients. So I believe first, that governments should facilitate and support the growth of the sector through helpful and permissive legislative framework, and not too much bureaucracy, which I gather is a theme that's been running through the whole of this conference today. Accessible and appropriate investment, recognition of the social value, and indeed education and training, all of which you have identified. But the second thing is, to have a truly thriving sector, we must value and nurture an ecosystem which allows social enterprise to do what it does best, and that's to innovate, to find new solutions to social and societal problems, and most important, to have an independent voice to speak to government at all levels. So let's look at policy and politics, because we realised in the late 1990s in the UK, with the election of Tony Blair's government, who were driven to do massive investment in economic growth and jobs, just like your government is doing, we realised that social enterprises and cooperatives had no voice in that investment, were not influencing it. And that led us to create Social Enterprise UK. We did two things when we set up a voice for social enterprise, which covered the whole sector, including cooperatives and large retail organisations that are cooperatives, all kinds of different social businesses. When we founded that, we then had a voice in our government because we could talk with one voice. But the second thing that we did, which is the important policy issue, is we also set up in the British Parliament what we call the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Social Enterprise. In the UK Parliament, members of Parliament like myself can set up groups and interest groups if we can persuade all the political parties within our Parliament to support it. And so myself, a Conservative and a Liberal Democrat, the three largest parties at the time, we set up the All-Party Parliamentary Social Enterprise Group. And this slide shows you that since we set that up in 2001, we've had 4 different kinds of governments and administrations in the UK. So we've had a Labour government, you can see that in red. Then we had a coalition government, which is the blue and yellow. We've now got a Conservative government and now a minority Conservative government. So 4 governments that we've had to deal with and support, and who've supported social enterprise. That group still exists. It is still the main conduit for discussions with the British government from our parliamentarians, and it's also a way of showcasing the work of social enterprises. It has been an important bridge over those administrations, and it has been part of the drive to continue to have a legislative and regulatory framework which supports the growth of social enterprises. So most recently, our Prime Minister Theresa May, I realise only a Prime Minister for possibly another 2 days, was involved, she involved social enterprises in her government's drive for the inclusive economy. So the thinking and policy work is part of the growth of our inclusive economy. So you can see on this chart here the milestones which figure in the development of that legislation and policy. And it's something that has helped to sustain us. Those of us who are sort of older like me, we know that in the 30 or 40 years ago, if one government set up support for a particular issue, like cooperatives, and then the next government would see it was a creature of that politics, then it was not likely to continue getting that support. So this has been vital to the policy framework that's sympathetic in the UK. So what do you think, what do we think that we should be doing? So what supports the innovations which we're doing in the UK? What's creating the jobs in the new social enterprises? Well, a couple of things. One is partnerships with the private sector, which address their supply chains, where opportunities can lie in trading for social enterprise. So even in the UK Parliament, for example, through competitive tender, a social enterprise runs our nursery and supplies all our bottled water. We create the idea of social value that social enterprises can bring to the procurement of public services at national and local level. That has huge potential for job creation and keeping value in local communities. Working with the government on the Inclusive Economy programme, which is challenging major societal issues. And what should governments not do? Well, they shouldn't spend a huge amount of time thinking about what the definition of a social enterprise is. We need to be as flexible as possible. Limit definitions of things like ensuring that the investment of surpluses goes into the social purpose of the enterprise, and having an asset lock, which means the value of that enterprise can be kept for a social purpose. Do not set up huge bureaucracies which will kill innovation before it gets started. I was very struck by the Minister's remarks this morning. And be ready for things to fail. Actually, social enterprises have a better record of not failing than small and medium-sized enterprises. They are more sustainable, possibly because of the commitment that's gone into founding them. And also develop appropriate investment and funding. We really appreciated the fact that when the Labour government in 2000 set up Unlimited, what they were doing was creating a fund which could give grants, small grants, at local level to people who wanted to explore the ideas of a new business and a social enterprise. At a larger scale, Big Society Capital was established in 2009-10 by the British government as an independent investment vehicle for social businesses. There's no doubt that we still struggle to find the right and appropriate scale of investment. Finally, I'd like to finish by touching upon training and education for social entrepreneurship, because I'm so impressed that this has been a theme running through this conference, because we had nothing. 20 years ago, there was not a single institution in the UK that provided any support for social entrepreneurs. Not at all, nothing. So we set up the School for Social Entrepreneurs. And the School for Social Entrepreneurs was set up as action learning rather than traditional academic learning. It meant budding social entrepreneurs could learn by discussing and talking with people who were already social entrepreneurs, and sometimes ones who'd failed. Because as we all know, you learn from failure. This doesn't deny the need to have a business plan, but it does mean that you can learn from those who've already done and have overcome the difficulties. And without doubt, the government was an enabler, because they gave the School for Social Entrepreneurs a rather large grant which allowed it not only to provide support for social enterprise in the UK, but actually across the world. I believe you have a great social enterprise future ahead of you in Indonesia, and I hope I might have shared some hints about the kind of things that we've done. You will do it differently. You will almost certainly leapfrog us, and I know I'm going to go back to London tomorrow, unfortunately, and I will have learned more, probably, than you will have about your experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenys. So let's do a bit Q&A. So Glenys is a social enterprise champion as well as legislator. So the UK social enterprise sector is definitely thriving. Based on your experience, what is the lessons to take away from the government side, I guess, to create this healthy ecosystem to make it thriving for all these years? From the government side, I guess, to create this healthy ecosystem.
I think that the need to keep speaking to government, and particularly to civil servants, never stops. We don't feel that we've at all succeeded yet in raising awareness. So finding champions in government is really important. We were very lucky. In 2001, the minister who went into the Department of Trade and Industry went in with a list of things to do which included supporting social enterprise, because we had spent time talking to her about what social enterprises could do, what the potential was, and that, of course, was a breakthrough moment. You are really very lucky, because I heard your Minister of Trade and Development say that you have a program to support social enterprises. We were starting from a very low base, so continuously talking to legislators and to civil servants is absolutely vital, and you have to take them to see your social enterprise, because you've got legislators who are elected all over this vast country. And what I would say to all of you social entrepreneurs, invite them to come and talk to you on the ground where you are, because you know they then take that knowledge into Parliament and it will help you.
So know your lawmakers. Jadi siapa yang dipilih itu penting. Jadi sebenarnya biar sukses social enterprise-nya. And then also another question. How does the government keep open-minded, I guess, with the dynamics going on the ground? Is the law pretty much available to change, I guess, based on the dynamics?
Yes, I mean, you are, I think, already discussing what the legislative framework, the regulatory framework should be for social enterprises. That's why the independent voice for social enterprises is so important, because actually that independent voice of people who are actually running social enterprises needs to inform what the legislative framework is. So, for example, on the chart that I showed you, the timeline, you will see that it says in about 2004-05 that we created a community interest company in the UK. Now, it's very easy to form a company in the UK. It is you can do it in a week. It's dead easy. The law is very clear. We're very old, mixed economy, so it's easy to do that. What we wanted was a business form that was as easy to create as a traditional company, but would have in it things like an asset lock, so the social purpose couldn't be destroyed, and the benefits couldn't be taken away from the social benefits of that company. So the government was absolutely happy to be considering that, but we needed to make sure they understood what the actual needs were. And the same applies to investment. You mustn't just assume that the traditional ways of deciding to invest in a company will work for a social business, because it's bound to take more time, for example.
Right. Okay, so we proceed with Nathan Smythe, Deputy Secretary on Employment, Department of Jobs and Small Business from Australian government. Please give Nathan a warm applause.
Aku minta maaf, presentasi hari ini akan diberikan dalam bahasa Inggris. Bahasa Indonesia saya tidak terlalu bagus. Okay, so I'd like to start by thanking the government of Indonesia. I'd like to particularly the Vice President's address this morning and the Minister's address, as well as the Australian Embassy here today, for assisting in the creation and the hosting of the Indonesian Development Forum 2019. It's an honour to be here, to be obviously amongst a very distinguished panel as well. And I love coming back to Indonesia. Every time I come here, I see an incredible rate of change. Means that I probably should come back a little bit more often. Australia, like Indonesia and many other economies in the region's got a very dynamic labour market. But there are different patterns that are unfolding across both economies. Everyone talks about the future of work and what that will mean into the future in terms of the way that labour markets actually play out in our various economies. But the future of work is now. It's actually happening now. And so sometimes when you're trying to engage policymakers and politicians about something that you call the future of work, maybe we've got the terminology a little bit wrong. We need to talk about labour markets that are in transition now. We need to talk about foundation skills that are required to ensure that we maximise labour market opportunities for our growing populations, and particularly for our younger members of society. And I know in Indonesia's case, you've got 50% of your 270 million population is under the age of 30. So there is a phenomenal opportunity that exists there, but it requires, like in Australia as well, to get those foundation skills absolutely right, to ensure that people are digitally ready, to ensure that people understand the way that economies, that business, that labour markets actually operate, so that they can develop some of those soft skills, how they can be creative, how they can understand the skills of tomorrow like coding, how they can better understand business development, dealing with customers and the like. They're key core skills that we see as critical enablers for both economies. But it's not just one labour market that you generally deal with in an economy, it's multiple labour markets. And I know Indonesia is a vast, diverse economy with multiple kind of different markets. And so Australia is not too dissimilar in many respects. And so we are looking to take different approaches and offer place-based solutions depending on the characteristics that exist in various labour markets. So we are engaging with local governments, with state governments, with the private sector, with the social services sector, to ensure that we create dynamic, capable and ready services that enable people to reach their maximum potential in the labour market. So the other thing I think that's worth emphasising is that jobs and skills now, career paths are no longer linear. It used to be years ago you'd start out in a career, you'd do your foundational education and training, and by the time you'd reached about the age of 23, about 90% of your learning had been completed. That's not going to be the case anymore. People are going to have multiple careers that are going to switch and change all over the labour market into different industries and different sectors. And I'll talk about how we're trying to come to terms with that a little bit later into my presentation. So it's not linear anymore. And foundation skills, soft skills, and what people are now calling hybrid skills are going to become more and more important. Because what's probably key is that those people that have those skills are going to have longer and more sustainable labour market attachment. Those people that actually don't continue to reskill, that engage in lifelong learning, that don't get those foundational skills, they're going to be the ones that are going to be more at risk of automation and what's actually happening as a result of technological change in the years ahead. And as we've heard from our presenters earlier today, the world is in transition. It's always been in transition. But by any measure, globalisation and the pace of technological change is accelerating that at an unprecedented rate. And so government and policymakers need to put in place the enablers to be able to deal with that. Sometimes even labour market laws and policies are always playing catch-up with the disruptors that come into our economies. We've got to try and get ahead of that, and we've got to try and understand and create the enabling framework to see firms flourish, employment flourish, businesses be profitable, so that they continue to generate the jobs of the future. In Australia, we're seeing massive transitional change. 30 years ago, the largest employing industry was manufacturing at about 15% of employment. Now, it's our 7th largest employing sector, with only about 6.5% of employment. Our next largest employment sectors in the next 5 years are going to be healthcare and social assistance, construction, education and training, and professional and scientific and technical services. We're going to see 2/3, those 4 sectors are going to see 2/3 of our employment growth in the next 5 years. And so what you're seeing in the Australian economy is what we traditionally would call manufacturing or jobs of the hand, where you then move to more technological, I suppose, industries and the like, where it was jobs of the head. And now we're seeing some of the jobs of the heart, which is the personal care sectors, because we have quite a significant ageing population in Australia, and healthcare services are going to be a booming sector in our economy. We're also seeing hybrid occupations. hybrid occupations really require a mix of skills, you know, that are going to be technical, software, business skills, creative skills, and interpersonal skills. And they're the fastest growing section of the labour market. And they estimate that in the United States, jobs with high hybridisation scores are going to grow by 16% in the next 7 years, compared with about 8.7% of jobs for other sectors. Also, I think that sometimes we can all be taken by some of the messages out there about how much automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning is actually going to disrupt jobs. And sometimes I think the industries that are responsible for some of those technologies are actually out there trying to promote that it's going to be more rather than less. In Australia, we estimate that around 10% of jobs are going to be susceptible to high risks of automation, and about 25% are going to need to change substantially. Although, having said that, McKinsey has found that less than 5% of jobs can be really fully automated. So they're still going to require people to be involved. But what we're seeing also is those digital skills, and that's where we're seeing strong linkages with our vocational and educational sector in Australia as starting to deliver more of those foundational digital skills to ensure that people basically are able to gain the qualifications that they need to engage in future labour markets. What we're seeking to do also is to do a number of enabling things in the Australian context. So we have a few projects that we're currently doing. One of them is called JEDI, and it really takes, what it does is it takes real-time data from skills that are in demand and supply to gain insights to address some of the skill shortages. So what we do is we use some artificial intelligence components at the moment to look at every job ad that is going on in our economy. Every single one of them, every day. And what we look at is what are the skills that those employers are requiring for particular jobs. What are those jobs that are changing, and what are the skills needed in order to do that? So we're building a system that enables us to then go to educational institutions and say, these are the skills that industry is actually requiring at the moment. You need to change your course curriculum in order to adjust to that skill set. We're then going to employers as well, surveying them and finding out what are those skills that they require and embedding that in a tool that enables anyone looking for a job in Australia, anyone looking for a career pathway, to be able to put their details in and find out what the skill set they require to engage in a particular career are. And if you go onto a website that we have called Job Outlook, we've got a new skills match tool. What that enables you to do is it enables you to actually put in all of the jobs that you may have had in your career. It will then tell you what jobs you're also suitable for, which ones you're already automatically qualified for. It'll also tell you which jobs you're not quite qualified for and what are the skills that you need to gain in order to transition to a new job in the economy. So that's on a joboutlook.gov.au website, and it's called our Skills Match tool. So there's some of the, I suppose, tools that we're putting in place in the Australian context to be an enabler from government to ensure that people are better equipped to deal with the transitions that are occurring in our economy. The other thing is that I think too often the vocational and education sector in economies is not given the preeminence that it needs. And in Australia, what we're noticing is that a lot of university graduates are now going back to the vocational and educational sector to reskill and learn. A quarter of people in our vet sector are over 45 years of age, and 2/3 are over 25 years of age. So it's incredibly important that we continue to reform our vet sector to maximise the opportunity for the years ahead. And with that, I've just hit my time's up notification. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you. So it's interesting, you're using AI to detect adequate skills needed for a particular industry. Wow. So what is the most particular skills needed for any type of industry in Australia?
Well, I think that what we're seeing is those skills that I talked about that are hybrid skills. But a lot of employers, when we survey them, what they're telling us is they want people that are motivated to learn. They want people that basically have interpersonal skills and that they actually have a willingness to engage in lifelong learning and the like, and they understand the needs of the business and the needs of a customer. They might not need all of those technical skills because employers, if they get the right person, are prepared to invest in developing their talent.
But are you having difficulties in that realm?
We are, absolutely we are. We are still importing a lot of labour into Australia to fill some of those skills gaps. And what we've noticed in recent years is that in-house training has dropped. And that's, we're still trying to work out exactly why that is. But that's where the government's made, the federal government, we have multiple layers of government in Australia, has given a commitment to reform our vocational and education system to ensure that we are back getting those right foundational skills and technical skills for our workforce.
So that's the ongoing program from the government. Okay, next up is Mas Ricky Pesik, Wakil dari Kepala Badan Ekonomi Kreatif. Kalau Badan Ekonomi Kreatif, jadi presentasinya harus kreatif juga Mas Ricky. Oke, kita lihat. Mas Ricky Pesik.
Selamat sore semua. To be fair, I think out of 3 speakers, I will speak in bahasa Indonesia. So please put your translation kids on. Sebelum saya mulai, saya akan menjelaskan tentang pembentukan Badan Ekonomi Kreatif yang dibentuk pada bulan Januari 2015 yang tugasnya sangat khusus adalah untuk melakukan akselerasi kontribusi ekonomi dari sektor industri kreatif sehingga Bekraf dibentuk untuk mendukung terjadinya akselerasi hadirnya kebijakan-kebijakan baru, program-program baru, dan fasilitasi yang lebih luas bagi para pelaku ekonomi kreatif di seluruh Indonesia. Jadi ini adalah tugas besar dalam bidang job creation sebenarnya. Kontribusi ekonomi kreatif sendiri yang tercatat berdasarkan data BPS saat ini, kontribusi ekonomi kreatif Indonesia terhadap GDP sekitar 7,4%, itu kurang lebih 950 triliun rupiah pada tahun 2017 atau ekuivalen sekitar 70 miliar US dollar. Jumlah tenaga kerja pada tahun 2017 di bidang ekonomi kreatif sudah mencapai 17,4 juta orang dan kontribusi terhadap ekspor dari sektor ekonomi kreatif sudah mencapai 20 miliar US dollar. Selama ini, selama 4 tahun berdirinya Bekraf telah menjalankan kurang lebih hampir 100 program utama yang dituangkan dalam ribuan kegiatan sepanjang tahun di seluruh Indonesia maupun di seluruh dunia terkait dengan target utama Bekraf untuk memperkuat ekosistem usaha pelaku ekonomi kreatif nasional dan juga menguatkan mata rantai bisnisnya sendiri. Sehingga dari kegiatan Bekraf selama ini bisa dilihat terentang dukungan kebijakan program dan fasilitasi Bekraf itu dari festival film, komunitas di Purbalingga, bentuk pelatihan manajemen keuangan bisnis kreatif di Kabupaten Sika Flores, sampai ke pengarus utamaan seni rupa kontemporer Indonesia di Venice Art Biennale, bahkan pengarus utamaan karya-karya literasi Indonesia di London Book Fair, Frankfurt Book Fair, Shanghai Book Fair, dan lain sebagainya, dan bahkan hingga sampai bekerja sama dengan sebuah perusahaan artis manajemen global, 88 Rising, untuk membawa musisi-musisi Indonesia bisa masuk ke dalam ekosistem pasar musik global yang sesungguhnya. Saat ini ada 4 musisi Indonesia sedang di Los Angeles, akan melahirkan single baru, dan akan konser di LA pada tanggal 17 Agustus dan mudah-mudahan itu bisa membawa nama Indonesia masuk ke ekosistem pasar global yang sejati. Lebih jauh lagi tentang upaya Bekraf untuk mendorong pertumbuhan sektor ekonomi kreatif, terutama memperkuat ekosistem. Kita sadari bahwa saat ini kondisi ekonomi kreatif memang masih berada dalam tataran, analogi saya, masih dalam tataran trending topics yang sporadis. Untuk jangka panjang, ekonomi kreatif nasional perlu menjadi kebijakan strategis dalam arus utama pembangunan nasional, karena atas dasar itulah upaya-upaya besar dilakukan Bekraf. Salah satunya pada November 2018, Bekraf bersama Kementerian Luar Negeri berhasil menyelenggarakan World Conference on Creative Economy yang pertama kali, yang tujuannya adalah untuk melakukan mainstreaming atau pengarus utamaan isu industri kreatif global itu bisa diserap dalam kebijakan ekonomi global ke depannya. Karena tanpa melakukan upaya pengarus utamaan industri kreatif ke dalam kebijakan global ekonomi, sektor ekonomi kreatif akan bergerak lambat sekali untuk menjadi salah satu alternatif ke depan bagi masa depan dunia, menciptakan ekonomi yang lebih inklusif di muka bumi ini. Dan kita percaya itu bukan hanya inisiatif Indonesia saja untuk melakukan itu, tapi saya pikir ini merupakan harus menjadi upaya kolektif global bersama. Dan untuk itu saya akan menutup paparan saya dengan memutarkan satu video hasil dari World Conference on Creative Economy yang Bapak Ibu sekalian nanti bisa menangkap sebenarnya gagasan besar apa yang ingin dicapai oleh Indonesia dalam menempatkan ekonomi kreatif dalam arus utama pembangunan nasional ke masa depan. Terima kasih. Silakan videonya diputar.
Welcome to the first World Conference on Creative Economy, one of the most important centers of creative industries in the world. In this era of globalization and advanced technology, the creative industry has become a game changer.
As a foreign minister, the three top priorities that I always have in my mind: first, cooperation; second, cooperation; and third, cooperation.
Why this gathering is so critically important. I would like to see more practitioners in this space. If we're really going to move forward with the creative economy, we need to embrace all creatives.
We are here today not to define creative economy is, but share ideas to collaborate to nurture the development of global creative economy.
My topic today is about leading creativity into the global stage. What better opportunity to talk about than on this platform?
To have this meeting first time in the world, as well as the first initiative for all countries in the world to really look at the technology and creative economy as a potential vehicle for economy to grow further, grow more inclusive. Prosperity for all applies in our effort to develop creative economy. The principle of no one left behind must be adopted. With today's fast technological development and globalization, creative economy can be truly inclusive and accessible for everyone, everywhere, from every corner of the world.
The first World Conference on Creative Economy is an effort to connect multi-dimensional elements and stakeholders of the creative economy. Your participation and contribution at this conference will mark a global milestone for a more inclusive world economy.
Growing
at an exponential rate, creative economy has become engines of economic development in many regions and source of employment for millions of people around the world.
I think it is very important for us to discuss the regulatory framework, to discuss the education, how we're going to foster creative economies from school.
So happy to see many of distinguished ambassadors and colleagues from so many countries. I think we have to work together to create the global competence which is needed and intercultural competence for creativity.
The Indonesian government is fully committed to take on a larger role for the development of the global creative economy. I hope that the World Conference on Creative Economy can be a catalyst in garnering global commitments to establish a center of the excellence for creative economy. Our youth are the main source of creative energy that continues to ignite disruptive powers to make the world a better place.
Among many things, we reiterate our commitment to promote and enhance the contributions of private sector, in particular SMEs and entrepreneurs, who are the actual creators of innovation.
So to the attendees of the World Conference on Creative Economy, I say congratulations, and I am excited to see what transpires out of this, because I do believe it's going to be a game changer for the global economy.
During the 3-day conferences, while some of you were enjoying inspiring talk by prominent speaker on stage, or maybe connect and collaborate with other creative fellow of the Creative Village, diplomat and international organization were productively deliberating and negotiating an outcome document that will be proudly called as the Bali Agenda for Creative Economy.
Thank you to all of you, the creative people that has made the conference a success. The next meeting of WCCE will be held in Dubai, United Arab Emirates in 2020. See you at the next World Conference on Creative Economy in Dubai. We thank you.
Keren Mas Riki. Mas Riki, tadi pertanyaannya sebenarnya simpel. Tadi Lisa Russell bilang kalau misalnya ini mau maju ekonomi kreatif artinya kita harus embrace the workers in creative economy. Dalam titik ini apakah Indonesia udah embrace belum sih segitu banyaknya pekerja kreatif?
Ya, dalam upaya itu seperti yang tadi saya bilang, upaya pengarus utamaan ekonomi kreatif utamanya dalam banyak kebijakan-kebijakan nasional, utamanya government policy. Bekraf sendiri sedang mengupayakan hal itu terjadi karena ini pekerjaan besar. Ekonomi kreatif biar bagaimanapun, industri kreatif bagaimanapun adalah hal baru dalam banyak hal kebijakan negara, pemerintah. Sehingga salah satu yang baru berhasil diwujudkan selain pembentukan Bekraf tentunya ya, adalah pada tanggal 31 Desember 2018 Presiden Jokowi menandatangani rencana induk pengembangan ekonomi kreatif nasional, Rindek atau disingkat Rindekraf, yang mewujudkan banyak amanat bagaimana lintas kementerian dan lembaga sampai ke daerah itu bisa berkoordinasi. Dan yang kedua juga yang membuat saya hadir hari ini karena harusnya Pak Triawan Munaf adalah karena Pak Triawan sekarang sedang memimpin tim Bekraf untuk rapat final dengan Panitia Kerja Komisi 10 DPR RI menyangkut rencana Undang-Undang Ekonomi Kreatif yang ini akan makin gagasan adanya rancangan Undang-Undang Ekonomi Kreatif adalah supaya ekonomi kreatif bisa masuk ke dalam arus utama kebijakan pembangunan nasional tentunya. Pijakan yang lebih kokoh untuk itu ke depan. Nah, mudah-mudahan tahun ini bisa diketok oleh parlemen, akan ada undang-undang ekonomi kreatif.
Nanti kalau udah ada undang-undangnya udah diketok, jadi apa yang diharapkan dari pemerintah yang bisa menjadi kontribusi pemerintah sendiri?
Itu konsekuensinya banyak sekali bagi kita untuk kemudahan kerja kita, utamanya justru ke dalam berbagai kebijakan dan rencana kerja prioritas pemerintah ke depan untuk diterjemahkan. Karena selama ini memang cantolan hukum ekonomi kreatif kita hanya berdasarkan Kepres pembentukan Badan Ekonomi Kreatif. Tapi dengan adanya Rindekraf dan adanya Undang-Undang Ekonomi Kreatif, ke depan makin saya pikir akan makin tajam fokus pembangunan nasional kita untuk betul-betul mewujudkan apa yang Pak Jokowi inginkan, visinya bahwa ekonomi kreatif nanti bisa jadi tulang punggung perekonomian nasional kita. Sebagai tulang punggung tentunya bukan hanya soal kontribusi ekonomi, tapi juga tentunya job creation yang lebih masif lagi. Karena mengingat dari sektor ekonomi kreatif itu adalah salah satu sektor yang pertumbuhan jumlah tenaga kerjanya paling tinggi di Indonesia saat ini selama 4-5 tahun terakhir.
Jadi paling tinggi, tapi apakah juga kontribusinya terhadap pertumbuhan ekonomi yang besar?
Karena ruang pertumbuhan sektor kreatif kita dari angka-angka yang disajikan dan yang diukur oleh BPS, saya pikir ruang pertumbuhannya masih sangat luas. Utamanya dengan kehadiran digital ekonomi. Jadi saya ingin juga menyampaikan sebuah definisi yang menurut saya penting untuk kita pahami. Digital ekonomi belum tentu kreatif ekonomi, tapi kreatif ekonomi menurut saya 100% akan berada di digital ekonomi nantinya ke depan.
Oke, kita punya pertanyaan ini dari Slido. Sekali lagi kalau Anda ingin memberikan pertanyaan bisa langsung ke slide.do hashtagnya IDF 2019 Growth. Kita lihat di sini pertanyaannya. Ini dari yang pertama dulu ya, dari Ben. WEF has released the Future Jobs Report 2018, which stated that the work of accountants will decrease in 2022. What are your responses and suggestions to me as an accounting student? Ben, I hope you are still here. Oke, kayaknya ada Ben tadi yang angkat tangannya. Oke, who would like to respond, I guess? You can respond, yes.
That's a good question. I think that a number of careers are experiencing the same thing, but we're still going to need people to count the money and to create invoices, which will be probably more done in an automated way. In Australia, we're looking at businesses doing e-invoicing, so payment times between businesses get reduced. We're hoping to get that down to 20 and then 7 days because that increases cash flows for businesses. But at the end of the day, if I was being an accounting student now, I'd also understand the digital application of what my profession needs to do into the future, because the digital application is also going to be a core component. And yes, machines are going to be doing a lot of that work into the future, but there's also going to be a requirement for somebody to understand the digital context of that. So understanding coding, the way that new applications can be rolled out to businesses and the like, I think is going to be key.
So Ben doesn't need to change his job?
I would never give someone job advice.
Okay, stick to accounting, Ben. To Mas Henry, from your point of view, what do you think about Indonesia's government program so far? I guess this is related to manufacturing regulation. Is it on the right track or going far from the goals?
This is a tough question. If I give wrong answer, I will be in danger. But I will be honest. First, to grow the country, you need the infrastructure. I think it's always chicken and eggs. You know, you have the economy first, and you build the infrastructure, or you build the infrastructure and the economy will grow. I think our government already made decision 5 years ago that they will build the infrastructure. It is there, right? Many infrastructure is already there. Toll road, airports, seaports, electricity, those kind of things, which is great. So on that part, we are on the right track. The next question now is how to convert those things into an economic growth that we want to achieve. Because currently in the last 5 years, the economic growth is around 5%. And small contribution from those 5% coming from the manufacturing. So the next question that the government need to do is how to leverage this infrastructure development that has been done to boost the economy, the economic growth, the manufacturing growth. You know, I have a sense that Central Java probably could grow into kind of like a cluster of a lot of manufacturing with the new toll road and you know, a lot of new economy. And the government need to give a lot of incentives for that. You know, one of the very classical issues that we are facing as an investor to invest in Indonesia is the labor law, right? Labor law, which is very pro-labor, considered by the investor as one of, you know, a hurdles to boost or to increase their investment. But on the other side, you know, for me as an employee, this is a great labor law. So, you know, we gotta find in the middle here what to do. You know, doesn't want to demotivate the labor now with the labor law that probably too pro to investor, but not create, you know, the productivity that we want. So the third question, the third things related to what the government did so far, I think we need a lot of homework in the human resource. And I think that's what the government will be focused in the next term. The new administration will focus to the human capital development. Again, the question is, what kind of human capital development that we want? For me, from the manufacturing side, from the industrial side, we need to have so many skillful labor that will be able to, we need to upgrade the capability of labor, of jobs, seeker into the level that they can produce industrial goods, you know, in the standard, international quality standard. And that things can be done by pushing a lot of vocational schools. So again, vocational schools is one of the key here. That will help also the creative industry that Pak Ricky explained. Because our question is always about, okay, a lot of things that we have done in the creative economy. But again, what is the real contribution to the economic growth, right? So the 5% of economic growth that we have in Indonesia now, still mostly driven by consumption and by consumer goods and by the natural resources. So, you know, I keep repeating the message that we need to do. First is industrial growth. Second is vocational school. Third is upgrading the skill of human capital that we have in Indonesia as the next things that the government need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Henry. So focusing on human capital for the next 5 years, you think is a good starting point, at least?
Right. But again, the question is how?
Yeah.
Right? How? In the last president's speech, Pak Jokowi mentioned about to develop the institution Lembaga Manajemen Talenta Nasional. I think that's great. And leverage diaspora. That's great. But then we need to formulate it into something that we can see this is the target and this will be the result. It's not only, you know, we have the event, the celebration, the show off, but at the end of the day, it has to contribute to two things: the economic growth, how many percent of it? Second, competitiveness level of Indonesia in the global world.
That means also to open up, let's say, to foreign teachers, say, right? Transfer knowledge from other countries.
I think so. I mean, it sound not nationalistic probably, but we are in the world where speed is something, and we need to learn in a fast speed,
Right.
in a very fast
And open-minded.
and open-minded.
Correct.
So diversity has to be the, has to be the key here. And in fact, diversity is, I keep saying this, diversity is human, right? So, because we were born diverse. So accepting diversity is human. Rejecting diversity is inhuman. So, a lot of things that we can do for growing Indonesia in the future.
Tepuk tangannya dulu dong. Next is for Madam Glennis. Can you please tell us the case of NGO transformation to social enterprise that is currently happening in the UK?
Yes, we have a very large and very diverse NGO sector in the UK, charitable sector, we call it. And it's a very old one. I mean, they've been around for several hundred years, some of them. And so several of our large NGOs, over a period of time, particularly those who are involved in supporting people in health and social care, have created social enterprises. They've either created social enterprises within their charity, within their NGO, to be able to deliver contracts for the government or for local government or for the National Health Service, or they've actually become a social enterprise themselves. They've changed their status. I'm thinking of one of our very large NGOs called Turning Point. Turning Point supports thousands of people who've got alcohol and drug addiction all across the country in all kinds of different programs. They are now, and have been actually for about 10 years, a social enterprise, which they did by having a discussion across their organization. It means that they lost some of the charitable benefits, but they felt they gained a lot more from being able to move quickly, to innovate, and to be able to compete for public sector contracts. So it's there's a lot of cooperation and discussion between the NGO sector and social enterprise sector, and a lot of lines are very blurred. And that takes me to the point I made in my speech, is that we need the government to therefore be very flexible about definitions and about status and so on, so that it's quite clear, so they don't stop people from innovating in terms of the business form or the governance that they choose to set up their social enterprise.
Okay. So I think this is Mas Ricky, you can answer this one, the last question. Do you think technological advancement could provide new opportunities for the differently abled communities? Is that yours? How can we ensure they could contribute to the economy?
We have actually got a lot of social enterprises who are involved in setting themselves up or being social enterprises in the technology, in various forms of technology. So two young men came to see me not that long ago who are developing an app which can be used for people families of people who've got dementia. And I think it's going to be extremely successful. I am involved in a spin-out from our NHS, which is a website that specializes in the sort of things that local general practitioners and doctors need to have. That's been developed inside our National Health Service, but because it's a government National Health Service, there's an agreement that what we should do is spin it out so that it can actually develop and grow. There's just two very examples I happen to know about.
There's also in Australia there's an interesting social app which enables a person that's visually impaired to put the camera on their phone, and it is then streamed to a call centre who can guide the person down the street or in the middle of a shopping centre or in a subway or something like that. So there are some fabulous things, I think, going on, and I think technology is going to significantly improve the lives of people that basically are, suffering from multiple disabilities or the like, or the ageing, frail. There are some incredible opportunities out there, and I think that's where governments can play a role in enabling some of those apps to actually, see the light of day.
Dan ini mestinya juga bisa dilakukan juga kali ya Mas Riki ya, karena kan banyak sekali talenta-talenta yang punya ide-ide kreatif gitu yang menggunakan teknologi khususnya untuk disabled community begitu misalnya. Kira-kira kalau nanti ini kita ngomongin undang-undang yang ada atau dari Backcraft sendiri bisa nggak sih kayak menaungi ini kalau misalnya dengan perkembangan teknologi bisa nggak mengembangkan teknologi untuk membantu orang-orang yang disabled gitu dikatakan di sini, tapi lewat social entrepreneurship. Kalau di sini kan belum terlalu banyak mungkin ya yang bisa fokus ke sana begitu.
Sebenarnya banyak. There's a lot of ideas from young people. The first question mark I just answer with one word, indeed. But the second question is how can we ensure they could contribute to the economy? I think the most important, the idea is there. There's a lot of Indonesian young people with brilliant idea for that kind of solution as well. But as a government, I think the biggest thing the biggest homework we have to do is how we open the wider access to many things for these ideas to be implemented as an economic, as a new business. The access to finance, and actually same like what Mas Henry said about this incentive. In the creative economy, the biggest competitiveness is the availability of incentive. So there's two biggest thing now we work in our agency for the next big policy in the creative sectors is, the first one, we try to establish a new regulation incentive for the retail export. So it's for the creative industry, artisan player, because now the incentive mostly, economic incentive, regulation incentive, mostly for the manufacturer, big industry, commodities, but not for the creative artisan yet. So that's one way. And the second one is what we call it as an intellectual property financing scheme. We need this new scheme in the financial sector in Indonesia. And as a industry that based on the intellectual property, we need to come out with new regulation in the financing system based on the intellectual property. Because we actually already have the law. Undang-undang Hak Cipta itu memungkinkan intellectual property dibuatkan skema finansialnya ke depan supaya access to finance, access to infrastructure, access to marketing, and access to government also widely available for this young talented and a lot of idea that they're talking about.
Henry, I think you can answer this one too. I know that social entrepreneurship in Indonesia is not thriving yet. It's going there, I hope, soon. Tapi how should Indonesia capture the opportunity to develop social entrepreneurship and the growth of digital economy? And you can answer this too based on your experience.
Yeah, I think this is more for you rather than me.
My question to you is, are you encouraging social enterprises in the manufacturing industries?
Yes. Yes.
Because it's an important
It is,
Yes,
it is.
especially with all these young people who want to serve a social purpose as well as make money.
Right, right. I think if we talk about the supply chain of it, right, and a lot of processes from raw materials into end product. This is an area where you can have social entrepreneurship playing on that, and we do have a lot of success. I think one of the beauty of the economic growth in Indonesia in the last 5 years is the involvement and the emerge of social entrepreneurship in Indonesia. I mean, at least that's not what I saw at least 10 years ago when I started doing the activities. But Andini, if I may, I would like to touch the question that asking to the panel about the disability things. You know, since I'm one of them, and I want to give the message to all of you, especially who works on the, you know, with the disability things, whatever you call the name, you know, different ability or disabilities. I think don't waste the time on it, right? The reality, if you are on the wheelchair, you are on the wheelchair. The reality, if you cannot see, you cannot see, right? If you cannot hear, you cannot hear. So you just have a situation where you need to do extra effort. So you just have a situation. Regulation, attention, awareness, I think is already there. Technology, of course, will help. But at the end of the day, it is whether you want to work or not. You want to go out from your home saying that I want to find a job and I want to work. That's the key. Avoid to become people, you know, who are, if you are disabled, who are putting your hand below, naruh tangan di bawah. You will never go anywhere. I think opportunity is always the same. You just need to run extra miles for it. And don't wait until somebody give it to you. So, you know, the future is much more brighter for those of you who are unlucky enough having problem with your physical or mental ability. Thank you.
Mas Ricky, I believe the last question is for you. Ada pelatihan dan pengembangan ekonomi kreatif untuk Indonesia Tengah dan Timur dari milenial Indonesia Tengah Timur nih.
Yes, currently actually almost 50% of Backcraft program held in Indonesia Tengah dan Timur ya. But because Backcraft office is still situated in Jakarta only, so we have a very limited program to cover all area of Indonesia Tengah and Timur. But if you follow our social media channel, like our Twitter, our Instagram, or soon there will be in line as well, or from the website, we have quite a lot of program training in Indonesia Tengah and Timur. And mostly also Backcraft facilitate and accommodate the initiative from communities also. So it's not necessarily coming from Backcraft as a government, but also Backcraft can facilitate and accommodate the initiative from communities, young communities from Indonesia Timur dan Indonesia Tengah. If you have a very good program, like for example, what we facilitate in Sorong, for their preparation to have this festival, the first festival hip hop di Papua Barat ya. There will be soon in next September. Some kind of that initiative, or the initiative from the film community from Kupang. So they will have this new open air cinema built by Backcraft this year for them, facing the beach in Kupang cities. So for them to become the infrastructure to have the regular program for all the young community in Kupang area to express their creativity. Yeah. So that kind of, so we are open and it's very inclusive. You can access through the digital platform what we have right now.
Okay, that's awesome. Jadi ada pelatihannya untuk ekonomi kreatif di sana. Kalau Gigi ada nggak untuk milenial di Indonesia Tengah dan Indonesia Timur, terutama yang mau masuk industri manufaktur? Ekonomi kreatif di sana. Kalau Gigi ada nggak untuk milenial di
Tengah ada, Timur kita belum punya. Tengah ada. But if we don't have the activities yet saat ini di Indonesia Timur. Waktu itu pengen bikin model run untuk power plant, jadi kapal bawa LNG, terus ada LNG terminal di pulau-pulau kecil gitu, kemudian dikonversi ke power, tapi masih belum jalan itu. So we don't have it yet.
All right, so before we finish up, I would like to hear from each speakers. Before we close the session, we're talking about growth and jobs. We obviously discuss about the challenges and our current resources. So in order to face the future, how can we make sure that we have the right resources from all stakeholders, be it from the employment and then also from the government side and the industry, maybe let's say from the regulation for all of us to make sure that we can just tackle whatever challenges that we have ahead from each speakers. Mulai dari Mas Riki dulu mungkin.
I think considering of our demographic bonus, which is very tremendous Indonesian position right now, we have like how many population now, and we have a lot of opportunity actually, including in the creative sectors. So it's a moment now or never. But how we approach, I think government should produce more progressive regulation and incentive in order to grab this opportunity. This is the milestone, the opportunity. The room to growth is very extensive now for the creative industry. I give you one example. In the film industry, currently Indonesia is the lowest cinema screen ratio to population in the region, even compared to Cambodia, Vietnam, and other neighbor country that quite similar. We only have 2,000, currently almost 2,000 screens for 265 million populations. Compared to South Korea, for example, they have 5,000 screens for 60 million population. And don't compare to China, they have 80,000 screens for 2 billion population. So this is room to grow. And we see after the regulation in the film industry was taken out from our negative investment list, the growth of industry actually showing big opportunity on the industry and also in other sectors, especially now in digital economy. For example, we see all the projection about the market cap on digital economy globally and nationwide. In Indonesia, we are projected as one of the biggest e-commerce market in the world for the next 10 years. But the big question is how our product or our service can dominate the share on that opportunity. Otherwise, we are just become the market. In order to do that, I think a lot of new incentive, new progressive support for the creative sectors need to be really produced very soon by the government, especially from Backcraft side. So that's
Well, that's a very difficult question. You've almost asked us to solve world poverty, I think. But I think we've got to go back to education. It has to be the foundation for everything. We have to ensure that the youth of today are receiving the right foundation educational skills. And those skills are linked to where the jobs are going to be, what industry requires, and government needs to ensure that it puts the right enabling, I suppose, mechanisms in place to ensure that seamlessness, so that you have the population linked to education, linked to what the skills that they require are, but we also need to ensure that we do that in an inclusive way. We need to increase women's workforce participation. That's going to be critical to, we need to reduce gender pay gaps. We need to ensure that people who are less fortunate, that may suffer from various barriers to getting into the workforce, are adequately supported to reach their maximum potential. Because I think when a society gets to that point where you are looking after your most vulnerable and ensuring that they have an equal opportunity to succeed in their employment career, then you function as an ideal society in many respects. Now, that's very utopian, I know, but it requires governments to get the policy settings right. It requires public servants to listen and engage with industry and also with the workforce, and to understand the impact of technology and what it's doing to their economic circumstances in different labour markets that exist in their economies.
I'm going to just limit myself to mentioning what the benefits are for social entrepreneurship and social enterprises in terms of job creation. At a local level, this means that local communities can take control of the jobs and the creation of jobs within their communities and keep the wealth and value within their communities. That has to be worthwhile. At a public service level, in terms of the delivery of public services, then you are looking at innovation, social enterprises innovating to provide public services right across the spectrum. We have a social enterprise in London that runs some of London's buses, for example. There is really no barrier to what a social business can do and the size that it can be. What we also know is that they are very often very much more sustainable businesses and more resilient than traditional SMEs. That is not having a go at SMEs at all. Goodness me, my mother was a shopkeeper. But it does mean that you are looking at more sustainable businesses, so that's worthwhile. And then, of course, in the UK, half of the social enterprises are headed by women. There is a great diversity in terms of who's employed, in terms of disability, ethnicity, gender, and they lend themselves to that kind of diversity partly because they're businesses that are based on a value-driven and value to society, amongst other things. So I would say that they are an important part of the job creation programme that you have going forward in Indonesia, and they are a very vibrant part. So I really look forward to what happens next.
Number one, we need coordination. I think everybody already talked, everything separately, and there is a movement already. The awareness already started. Disability, women participation, creative industry, digital economy, all of those things are there, scattered. Now what we need is the coordination to convert all of this into a real economic growth. And then we have probably to reduce a little bit celebration and, news, events, big stuff like that. Let's work, coordinate. I give you an example. I hope my data is wrong, but this is what I heard. We are the biggest Muslim population in the world. We use a lot of Muslim fashion. Pariki knows better than me. But the supplier, number one supplier for Muslim fashion in the world is not Indonesia, it's Turkey. So, logically we can beat them, but we need to coordinate, all of these sectors need to be coordinated. And this is the time. I mean, we already start a lot of things in the last 5 years. Infrastructure is built, ideas flowing around, people who cares about every issues available, everyone wants to do something for the country. Now, how to coordinate, and I think I really expect that the government do this, make the coordination among all of their department ministers to create the real result that can be calculated into the economic growth. Thank you.
Speakers, thank you very much for your time. Sekali lagi tepuk tangannya untuk para speakers kita di sesi siang hari ini. Acara saya kembalikan ke MC, silakan.
Ladies and gentlemen, this Inspire Plenary 1 is now concluded. Once again, a big round of applause for all speakers and moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much once again to distinguished speakers and moderator. Speakers and moderator, you are kindly requested to pose together for a photograph. Speakers and moderator, you are kindly requested to pose together for a photograph. Please pose together for a photograph. Thank you very much. Mohon untuk berfoto bersama. Please pose together for a photograph. Thank you very much. Mohon untuk berfoto bersama. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now have approximately 15 minutes, I should say 10 minutes for coffee break. Snacks and refreshments are served for you at the foyer on the lower ground floor. And after the coffee break, we will proceed to the Inspire Plenary 2. Thank you very much for your kind attention. And later, at the same time, other sessions will take place in separate rooms. Please consult your book of program for details. Thank you. Other sessions will take place in separate rooms. Please consult your book of program for details. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, our program after coffee break in this assembly hall will be the Inspire Plenary 2, Future Jobs, with 5 distinguished speakers. Ayako Inagaki, Director for Human and Social Development, Southeast Asia Department, Asian Development Bank. Gregory Vines, Deputy Director General, International Labour Organization. Claire Naughton, Senior Research Consultant. Toby Braden, Managing Director, Australia Alpha Beta. Arif Widiasa, CEO, Agate Studio. And our moderator will be Mr. Alfito Dinova from Detik Network. Will be Mr. Alfito Dinova from Detik Network.
IBCSD, Koalisi Seni Indonesia, Saraswati, Communication for Change, kerjasama pemerintah Indonesia dan pemerintah Jerman, Oxford Policy Management, Solidaritas, TEDx Jakarta.
Mohon perhatian Bapak dan Ibu sekalian yang kami hormati. Kami persilakan untuk memasuki ruangan dan menempati tempat duduk karena beberapa saat lagi kita akan mulai sesi berikutnya yaitu Inspire Plenary Session 2. Kami persilakan Bapak Ibu sekalian untuk memasuki ruangan dan menempati tempat duduk yang disediakan. Kita akan mulai beberapa saat lagi. Mohon Bapak dan Ibu sekalian berkenan untuk menempati kursi-kursi yang masih banyak yang kosong di barisan-barisan terdepan. Terima kasih. Ladies and gentlemen, you are kindly requested to proceed to the Assembly Hall. The Inspire Plenary Session 2 will begin in a few minutes. Please be seated. Thank you. Baiklah, segera kita akan mulai. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin this session. Distinguished speakers, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the Inspire Plenary Session 2. And we have 5 distinguished speakers who will put special emphasis on future jobs. This Inspire Plenary Session 2 will be led by our moderator, Mr. Alfito Di Nova from Detik Network. We are still waiting for other participants who will join us in this assembly hall. Kami persilakan Bapak Ibu sekalian yang baru saja masuk untuk menempati kursi yang disediakan. Silakan untuk maju ke depan karena masih banyak kursi kosong di baris-baris depan. Terima kasih. Untuk menempati kursi-kursi yang masih banyak yang kosong di barisan-barisan terdepan. Ladies and gentlemen, since we have many available seats in front, if you wish to come forward, you are very welcome to do so. Thank you. Session 2 will begin in a few minutes. Please be seated. Thank you. Distinguished speakers, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the Inspire Plenary Session 2. And we have 5 distinguished speakers who will put special... Ladies and gentlemen, future jobs. This Inspire Plenary Session 2 will be led by our moderator, Mr. Alfito Di Nova from Detik Network. And now I shall pass the floor to Mr. Alfito Di Nova.
Good afternoon. Selamat sore. Saya tahu ini berat buat kita semua, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian. Tapi kita akan buat ini semenarik mungkin. I will try to engage this discussion as casual and as fun as possible, knowing the time is not quite lazy time for us, tapi kita berusaha untuk enjoy karena topik hari ini topik di sesi ini yang akan saya bawakan adalah topik yang cukup menarik seharusnya. Kita akan menghitung sampai sejauh mana sesungguhnya ekonomi akan berpengaruh dan teknologi akan berpengaruh terhadap ketersediaan lapangan kerja dan bagaimana tenaga kerja Indonesia akan mengendalikan itu semua. Kita akan membahasnya dari perspektif berbagai sisi. There's 5 stakeholders, 5 guests that will, or speakers that will share to you their insight about the future jobs in Indonesia. Saya akan panggilkan satu persatu narasumber saya. Yang pertama adalah I will invite all the speakers to join me on the stage. The first one would be Ms. Ayako Inagaki, the Director, Southeast Human and Social Development Division, Asian Development Bank. The next one is Mr. Gregory Fines, Deputy Director General ILO. My next speakers, Chief Executive Officer of Agate Studio, Mas Arif Widiasa. The next one, Senior Research Consultant, Cicero Claire Norton. And last but not least, Mr. Toby Brennan, Automation and Skills Advisor, Prospera Managing Director, Alpha Beta. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian yang ada di belakang bisa maju ke depan. Kita merapat sedikit supaya konsentrasi kita benar-benar full dalam diskusi kali ini. Hello everybody, how are you today? Okay. I will ask the question, you will answer the question. That's the ground rule until finish. Okay, I will give the first question to Ms. Inagaki about how has economic transformation taken place in Asian countries and propelled its stages from low income to medium and high income countries. Hopefully Indonesia will be a high income country.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for the question. The historical evidence that suggests that there's 3 things: expanding export-oriented manufacturing, together with huge investment in capital, human capital, and the enabling infrastructure were the best ingredients needed for accelerating economic transformation. We have seen that successfully in Japan, with the Asian tigers, and as well as China. Maybe 5 underlining factors that I would like to mention, and I guess you can already anticipate that. First is really an investment on both physical and human capital. And we see it in any of the high-performing countries in the East Asia America reports, or China, or very recently in India. And it can be taken from the viewpoint of high investment in physical and human capital, and these have not been only to facilitate the structural transformation or structural shift, but also increases in labor productivities. The second point is the promotion and support for technological adoptions and innovation that has enabled these countries to catch up with the global frontier at a much more rapid pace. Now, the third point is that in addition to domestic demands, is the opening up of domestic markets to the outside world and embracing globalization. Remember in the plenary discussions, Professor Basu was also talking about some of the success stories that's really the openness to the outside economy. Just to remind ourselves that both Asia's export and import grew at an annual rate of 20% between 1960 to 2016, while the ratio of trade to GDP rose from 17.3% to 52% during the same period. The fourth point is that these Asian countries were successful in taking quite prudent macroeconomic policies. So this macroeconomic stability has enabled private enterprises and entrepreneurs to invest, take some risk, and innovate their economies to weather the external shocks as well. The fifth point is, and this is also something that Professor Basu was mentioning this morning, it's about the social inclusion, is to take care of the rising inequality. So such social sustainability, political and social stability was also very critical for the business environment. So those are the key lessons that we learned from the success stories of these Asian countries.
And what the key policies reform implemented to overcome the struggle from low value to middle to high?
Yes. Again, it's really a lot about physical and human capital investments, and I'm sure on human capital investments, some of my colleagues here will be also talking about. Now, coming back to maybe to Indonesia, for instance, I think Indonesia has been quite slow in the progress, first of all because of the abundance of natural resources, and also as Minister Bamba mentioned this morning, obviously the percentage of the manufacturing to the GDP has increased and is going to be increased. Now, I think it's what's going to be quite crucial where we're talking about employment is also to make sure that the manufacturing share of the employment increases. Now it's now less than 15%. And now, whether it's possible for Indonesia, for instance, that the goal to 2024 is to increase that share of the manufacturing to employment raise from 50% to, let's say, 20%. And in order to do so, now going back to the questions on human capital development, in order to do so, to have more sophisticated products, services, and system, it's essential for the government to invest in human capital development, which we heard a lot also this morning from the government.
Thank you. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, ladies and gentlemen, you can also join us with the questions. You can give the speaker question later on. They will answer your question. Please join us on sli.do or slido.com with the hashtag IDF 2019 Future. Ya, kalau tadi growth, sekarang hashtag 2019 Future. Now I'll move to Mr. Vines. Ms. Inagaki mentioned and stated that one of the most important thing to grow is human capital. How ILO insight about Indonesian human capital handling up until now?
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess I'd prefer to use the word people rather than human capital. That tends to describe better what our workers and what our members of society are. Look, I think the impact of what's happening in the world at the moment is just really quite transformational. We've heard this morning a lot about the technology aspects of it, but of course we've also got to take into account the issues around climate, the issues around demographic shifts, all of these changes that are just coming together that are going to create quite a momentous part of world history, I think. And what we at the ILO are trying to do is to work with a wide cross-section of organisations at both the national levels as well as the global levels to really try and tackle what these challenges are going to be and what the answers to these challenges are. We see it in a very positive light, however. Certainly there are great risks and challenges associated with the transformative change that's happening around the world, but more importantly there are great opportunities, and it's really those opportunities that we need to harness, that we need to work in a very collaborative way right around the world as to how we can address all of those. I think the other aspect that concerns an organisation greatly are the persistent inequalities that we see in the world, and in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases, those inequalities increasing. We continue to have serious issues about gender inequalities. We continue to have serious issues about inadequate inclusiveness in work for people with disabilities, people in other vulnerable situations. And all of these matters need to come together in those proposals around investing in people or investing in human capital. We have recently, the ILO's recently released its report on the future of work. This was a global commission that was established independently. It was chaired by the President of South Africa and the Prime Minister of Sweden, together with 25 other experts from around the world, including from the Asia and Pacific region. And it came down with 3 pillars of action that the world needs to take. The first of those is investment in people's capabilities. How do we prepare people for the changes that are going to be happening in the world of work? Not only the immediate changes, but the ongoing change. The pace of change is such that we've not experienced before. How do we equip people to deal with all of the transitions that they're going to need into the future and in their working lives? The second aspect, or the second pillar of those, is what they've called investing in the institutions of work. And basically what they're talking about here is how do we ensure that all working people have the necessary protections that give them dignity at work, that give them fair treatment at work, that provide adequate support and livelihoods for their families as well. We need to ensure that as the employment relationship is changing so much, we're seeing less and less of the traditional 40-hour weeks and permanent jobs. But how do we make sure that the protections and the benefits and the dignity that go along with that sort of work are transferred across to the new forms of work? How do we get more formalisation in the informal economy, which of course is a huge issue in Indonesia? How do we ensure that the proper protections and respect are there for people who work in those sectors as well? And then the third area of recommendations from the Global Commission was around how do we invest in proper decent work, taking into account all of these transformative changes. How do we deal with work in the future, taking into account climate change? How do we benefit from technology? So there are enormous challenges, but it does all come back to your very question, how do we better invest in people? And it's only people who are going to be able to find the solution to this. We call it, as I indicated before, the human-centred approach to the future of work, and that is what we are asking all of our member states. 187 countries around the world are members of the ILO, and they have recently signed up to an approach to put people at the centre of what they do in terms of policies to deal with the future of work.
One of the main issue in labour area in Indonesia is youth workers. You know, Indonesia have a lot of young person ready to work, but will they have any job that suit them, or what kind of job that government and other stakeholders should create. Is this similar with the global trend right now?
I would say that youth unemployment, the challenges of getting young people into work is probably the #1 challenge for most countries around the world in terms of ILO sort of activities. Everywhere I go, every government I talk to, I'll speak with, indicate youth employment as one of the huge challenges. And despite all of the effort that's been put into it, we still haven't found a solution. There are still 3 to 4 times as many young people unemployed in countries around the world as what there are older people. And so serious critical action needs to be taken to address this. Certainly part of our forward work, which again is something that our government signed up to just as recently as June this year, is really looking at the whole question of skills moving into the future, and particularly skills for young people, not exclusively, but particularly. And really, how do we address this problem that occurs in so many countries where there is a significant mismatch between the skills that young people are picking up at school, even vocational training or even university, and what it is that industry or the jobs of today need. There is no country that has addressed this properly. How do we get proper apprenticeships back?
No country.
I don't think there is a single country that's addressed this properly.
Okay.
There are gaps, there are much greater levels of youth unemployment, I think, in every country in the world than there are of non-youth unemployment. And it's really, how do we work both, particularly at a national level, but also at a global level in addressing these mismatches? How do we get academic institutions and training institutions and employers to be working better with governments, and for governments to be working better with them, to be mapping out into the future so that we are anticipating training needs 10, 15, 20 years in advance, not the short period that is happening in so many countries at the moment. And so I think there needs to be considerable effort taken on that. I think also we need to be in a situation that we're able to engage with young people as soon after they leave school or university as possible. We've seen so much instability around the world arising where we have highly educated young people literally with nothing to do. And so they become radicalised, they become disillusioned, they become more aggressive, and all sorts of social problems arise from it. So it is, I think, one of the most serious issues that we need to address. Certainly the opportunities are there now because of the way the world is changing, because of the way jobs of the future are going to be, in many cases, those are of more interest to younger people. So how do we make sure we're equipping them for that?
Yeah, not only mix and match, but the young people have their own thoughts. Mr. Brennan, nowadays Indonesian youth, they have will to become a YouTuber instead of doctor or, you know, economist or engineer. They try to create their own company. Usually we thought about how it's a trading company or etc. etc. Nowadays, many youngsters want to build their own startups. The question would be, do the automation give us hope, or just it's only a bubble? It's only a temporary time, like 10 to 20 years, and after that, gone by the wind.
Great. Thanks. Good question, and I know a very topical question in Indonesia, where there is a lot of excitement about Indonesia's unicorns of the moment and the prospects for the digital economy. I like this question because it brings me straight away to productivity as well, and I think, you know, if we think about where the debate about automation and the future of work has gone over the last few years, I think it's become very focused on the risks and the potential downsides of automation. Everyone is understandably concerned about the potential for large-scale job losses, and perhaps not focused enough on the opportunities from automation. So let me talk about where I think some of those opportunities are and why I think these investments in technology that we're seeing in Indonesia are actually really promising and positive. So automation is, it's very simply the adoption of new technologies to take over some forms of labour. Economists would call it substituting capital for labour. And that improves productivity because it allows workers to produce the same amount of output in less time. Let me give you a really basic example, and it's not an example from Gojek, it's an example from a farm. So a farmer ploughs a field by hand, or they use a buffalo. Perhaps it takes them 4 hours to plough the field. They invest in a mechanical plough or a tractor, they're able to plough the same field in 2 hours. So their productivity doubles. But productivity alone is not enough to generate wealth, either for the farmer or for Indonesia. And this is a really important part of the discussion, I think, around productivity in Indonesia and automation. Because the key is, what does the farmer then do with the 2 hours that they've saved by using a mechanical plough or a tractor? Are they able to productively reinvest that time in new work? No, perhaps they're able to go to the market, sell excess produce, or plough a field for a neighbour in that time that they've saved. So that way, you see, automation improves not only productivity, but it also lifts output. And that might seem like a simplistic analogy when we're talking about the world of startups, but the same concept applies. Automation lifts productivity and it creates time savings that can then be reinvested in new forms of work. Over the last 6 months, Prospera and Alpha Beta have been working together to study what the impact of automation is on the Indonesian economy at the moment since 2000. And our report on that is out today. It's called Capturing Indonesia's Automation Potential, and there'll be some copies down the front afterwards. So we've been studying in detail how automation is already contributing to productivity in Indonesia. And I think the results are worth sharing with you. I've got a chart up on the, I hate to make people look at charts this late in the day, but I think this one hopefully is quite interesting. So at the top of the chart, you'll see what's happened in the first 15 years of the 21st century in Indonesia. So overall, Indonesia's average growth rate was quite strong, around 5% per annum. Now we estimate that about 1.2 percentage points of that growth came from productivity improvements from automation. So about a quarter of GDP growth each year came from automation. Now, automation is not the only way that we can lift productivity in the economy. So about another 1.7 percentage points came from other sources of productivity improvement. And that includes things like investments in infrastructure, which we know is very important in Indonesia at the moment, improvements in management quality. But look at what the biggest contributor was to growth in Indonesia. It was the growth in the size of the labour force itself. That's really been doing the heavy lifting on Indonesia's GDP growth this century. So the question we ask ourselves, and this comes back to your question about, is there enough tech, is there too much tech already, is does that represent the full potential of automation in Indonesia? Could Indonesia get more benefit from automation than it's got so far this century? And I think the answer is clearly yes. Because when you compare the rate of automation in Indonesia, so that's the actual level of business investment in new technology, with the rate of automation in Indonesia's neighbours, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, even neighbours outside ASEAN, Bangladesh and India, there is a striking gap between Indonesia's performance and its neighbours. Now, there's a lot of variation.
Why so? Why so? Why?
So
why there's a gap?
On the whole, ASEAN leaders across different sectors are automating 50% faster than Indonesia. So that's a significant gap.
Why?
Yeah, good question. Look, I think lots of reasons, and we actually went and spoke to a whole bunch of companies and said, what are the barriers that you're experiencing in automation? Let me tell you about two that I think leap out. One is restrictions on the import of foreign labour and capital. So I think in some of the earlier sessions we've heard about the relatively restrictive investment environment still in Indonesia, things like import restrictions on used capital goods, difficulty bringing in foreign talent that is often required to drive automation. So I think liberalising some of that investment environment, it will also stimulate the rate of automation in Indonesia. I think one of the other barriers which is interesting, which is I think we didn't expect to hear as much from companies, was social and political pressure to maintain existing jobs. And that's true in all countries, is that companies experience pressure not to rationalise their labour forces through automation. But I think we heard it more in Indonesia than we do in other countries, and I think that's because there is a real concern here with full employment and the implications of automation for this large and growing labour force. And that's a harder issue to deal with. And I think there are some obvious reforms that government probably needs to consider in terms of liberalising the investment environment to stimulate automation. But dealing with that social and political pressure, I think, requires companies to be more innovative and think about other ways in which they can demonstrate their social responsibility. And one of the big ones for me that we talk about in the report is companies entering into skills partnerships and investing in the TVET sector themselves, so that they are automating, but at the same time, they're contributing to lifting the skills of the workforce more broadly.
Okay, thank you. Dari tadi belum tepuk tangan, kita tepuk tangan nih buat narasumber kita, biar juga nggak ngantuk ya. Okay, Ms. Noten, we believe that you have experience to learn about, to give us insight about what happened in Vietnam. Right now, Indonesian people always said that beware of Vietnam. They are moving forward fast. We don't want to get left behind. What's the silver lining that you can give us about what happened in Vietnam?
Well, I think the digital transformation journey that Vietnam's currently on is very similar and has some nice parallels to the journey that Indonesia is currently embarking on. And I think because there is the parallels, we can draw upon some of the learning, some of the challenges that they've encountered, some of the best practice approaches that they've used in response to some of those challenges. And I guess through the recent work that we've been doing with the Vietnamese government, we've been exploring what their digital future could look like. What are the different plausible ways in which they could leverage some of the emerging opportunities and mitigate some of the challenges that come with transitioning their economy with increasing levels of technology uptake and transformation. And using this, we often draw upon a range of different strategic foresight approaches, as these can really help us understand and distill what is changing, where are the future trends taking us, and how can we understand and plan and respond to these changes in a world that's increasingly moving at an accelerated pace, and where there is a uncertainty around how these different trends could unfold. We often use the analogy of a rip at the beach when talking about the sort of pace of change and I guess the two sides of the coin, the opportunities and the challenges that come with this pace of change. In Australia, where I'm based, we have really beautiful beaches that are popular summertime destinations for both tourists and locals. But when you're at the beach, it can sometimes be difficult to spot where the rip is. To an untrained eye, you could unknowingly swim into a rip current and be taken out to the back of the ocean. But if we know where the rip is, here is an image generated by some researchers at the University of New South Wales in Australia. If we know where the rip is, then we can avoid it. We can move in favour of safer waters. But if we know where it is, we can also use it to our advantage. And often surfers will deliberately swim into rips and use it to conserve their energy as they paddle out past the wave break. And so using strategic foresight, scenario planning approaches, we can identify where these future rips could be and identify how we can leverage the emerging changes and disruptions and technologies that are on the horizon. And so this is what we've done recently with the Vietnamese government, exploring the different plausible futures for their digital economy, particularly exploring some of the uncertainties we have around the level of digital adaptation across the economy. Will we see a fast or slow rate of change in terms of how quickly industries adopt new technologies and embrace the new business models that come with that? And also the uncertainties around the size of the ICT sector in Vietnam and how that could develop. In the future, would we see Vietnam being predominantly a seller of digital products, services and exports, or would it rely more strongly on buying these products and services from others developed abroad? And each of these different futures, each of these different scenarios that arise from these uncertainties have pros and cons and will require different policy and strategic responses in order to navigate these different futures.
If you can tell us at least 3 key important issues that Vietnamese can handle, what are they?
So we've heard a lot today around human capital and the importance of transitioning our workers with these technology and other workforce changes, and this certainly came through strongly in this piece of work from a digital skills perspective. And from Vietnam's perspective, the level of tertiary educated workers and digital competencies across their workforce has consistently been identified as a key roadblock that's currently limiting and inhibiting their digital transformation. So I think the education and training considerations around transitioning the workforce with new technologies is an important one. Further is around digital connectivity. In order to utilise some of these emerging technologies, we need to have sufficient connectivity and energy infrastructure that supports us in having that ubiquitous connectivity and ability to utilise the new technologies and services it provides. And then finally, I think the regulation and taxation reforms that come with a digital economy are an important consideration. The way we operate, the way we interact is dramatically transformed with the introduction of new technologies, and with that we need to think differently around how we manage that from a government perspective, but also from an industry and community perspective.
Oke, sekarang Mas Arief nih, Mas Arief. Dari semua apa yang sudah disampaikan, apa yang tidak dilakukan Indonesia dan apa yang harus dilakukan Indonesia? Isu soal miss and match misalnya, kemudian isu soal apa namanya keberpihakan terhadap digital industri dan lain sebagainya. Apa yang Anda rasakan sekarang? Arief adalah pelaku industri di usia berapa sekarang?
Games.
Berapa? Enggak, usianya berapa sekarang?
32.
32. Oke, mulai dari umur berapa bikin startup?
21 I think.
21.
Starting from umur 21.
Oke, silakan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Shall I use English or Indonesian?
Either way.
Okay.
Mereka udah pakai ini semua sih sekarang.
Oh ya, jadi saya pakai bahasa Indonesia aja ya. Oke. Selamat sore semuanya. Mungkin saya lebih banyak sharing tentang aspirasi dari generasi saya kali ya. Mungkin ini kalau kita tanya generasi kita 20 tahun lalu, cita-citanya mau jadi apa? Semuanya pada bilang saya mau jadi pilot, dokter, insinyur. Kalau kita tanya sekarang, seperti tadi Bapak bilang, bahwa sekarang banyak yang bilang mau jadi YouTuber. Saya bahkan ketemu beberapa anak-anak yang bilang mau jadi apa di masa depan, saya mau jadi cyborg. Jadi mereka bahkan berpikir untuk mengoperasi dirinya sendiri dengan mesin supaya produktivitinya bisa naik. Atau ada yang bilang saya mau hidup lebih panjang supaya saya bisa mengeksplor universe. Jadi imajinasinya sudah sangat besar. Mungkin kalau menurut saya sih diskusi terkait future job itu it's a very hard, sorry, jadi campur-campur kan tadi ngomongin bahasa Inggris. It's a very very hard discussion.
If you can deliver in English, it's better.
Okay, then I will use English then.
Okay.
Yeah. The discussion about future job is, I think, it's a very very hard discussion because I remember when I was in college time like 10 years ago, I saw a research that the top 10 high-paying but with low supply jobs is actually a job that haven't yet been invented 10 years ago. So 20 years ago. So 10 years ago, I saw that the top 10 job that time with the highest paying but low supply is actually a job that haven't yet been invented 20 years ago. So for us now to even predict what kind of job that is possible like for the next 10 years, 20 years, I think it's very, very hard. So I think the key, not key issue, but key question is what kind of fundamentals that we need to prepare the young generation for them to be able to cope with all the changes and all everything that happen in the next future. And I think for that, it's mainly super fundamental. Like for example, like the capability to have a critical thinking, yet with having an open mind mindset. That's one. And the second one is capability to understand the computational thinking. Computational thinking is ability to. Oh, sorry. The point is that because I'm from the tech industry, I personally believe that within the next 10 to 30 years, some or maybe like a lot of jobs will be replaced. Mainly the one that have a manual labor will be replaced by machinery that will work 24 hours. And then now because with the ever-growing of AI, job with a lot of like pattern recognition, for example like language translation, even like the language translation like this could be replaced with
news
AI.
anchor also.
Sorry?
News anchor also.
Yeah. and actually like there's also some research that I read. There's a trial for legal documentation like checking. There's a firm that use AI versus human, and the result is that the AI could do in 30 minutes what human need 30,000 man hours to do. So I think that will be like drastically change the landscape of our jobs. So yeah, I believe that we need to invest in the fundamentals of our people so they're able to develop their skills, they're able to develop everything, the computational. Why computational thinking is important? Because they need to understand how to speak with computers, how to program a robot, how to program an AI. And I think like in the near future with the more like, I think this, if you saw the announcement like last week, I think last week, there's a new breakthrough that a company called Neuralink trying to make a interface with computers more easier. Now we're interfacing with like the pen with typing, and it's directly implanted in our brain, so we could like communicate directly with the computers. I think that is one point, because if I speak the capacity of the amount of word that I need to mention is limited by the speed of my speaking and the speed of your listening. So it's only like maybe 1 megabyte per second, or But if we use a directly cable, it could be like 1 gigabit per second. I think that's also increased the capability of communication.
And then we become a cyborg, yeah?
Yes.
You always passionate to talk about mix and match. What's your thought about mix and match in Indonesia, Arif? And match.
Mix and match. Sorry, could you elaborate more? The mix and match.
How the education provide the better knowledge for the job?
Okay. Yeah, that's a very, very tough question. I think at the moment we still use the education system that we use in the Industrial Revolution, but now it's already like information era. I think it's please forgive my word. I think it's blatantly stupid to still use a system that is already like 1 century ago. So for example, like now, I think in my experience in school, I think we still need to, the teachers still force us to remember a lot of things, but now we could just easily search things. So it's not really mandatory for us to remember anything because we could easily search it. But the more important thing is how for us to have more skill set to think. That's, I think, the mandatory. So I actually have this random idea that I think that for Indonesia, I think the key solution for education is that for us to revolution the formal education system. How to do it, and the revolution is need to be scalable also. How to do it? I think it's very simple tests. We have I think like 2 million teachers at the moment. I believe that from those 2 million teachers, I think for each subject, there will be someone that is very, very good at delivering subject. Then we pair everyone with everything subject with a good movie maker or entertainer, and then make a video that able to share the subject very good. And then use IT system to scale the video everywhere in Indonesia. And then for all the teachers that still active in Indonesia, we shift the role. Rather than being a teacher, they're being a facilitator. The key goal is just to motivate the student, saying positive word every day, and then give the video, and then listen to the question and answer. I think it's more like a participating academic system rather than like directional academic system. And then ask the student to learn by themselves. I think it's very, very like revolutionary, but I think we could do some pilot.
Tepuk tangan lah, paling tidak ya out of the box ya. Whether it's implemented practically or not, we'll see. Oke, saya berikan kesempatan kepada Anda sekalian. I will give opportunity for you to join us by asking questions. Are there any question yet? On the Slido, ada 2. Coba kita lihat ya, jauh nih. Indonesia has a big number of working age group population. However, many are working in informal sector instead of formal. What are the proposed strategy to shift this? It suits for Mr. Vines, I think.
Yes, informality is a major problem right around the world. I think the estimates are for the number of employees in the informal economy in its various forms is something like 60% of the workers in the world. Certainly, from the work that the ILO does in this area, we're looking at it primarily from the labour and employment aspects, of course, but governments also have a huge interest in it from the point of view of social security systems, of taxation systems, and all other sorts of systems that also provide protections to workers and their families. I think it's a case in many areas as well, though, that sometimes the informal sectors are reluctant to formalise themselves because in some areas they can see it can lead to further difficulties and further complexities. So there is no single strategy and there is no simple solution to it. We work, as I say, with governments. We also work with employer organisations who are often representative of employers in the informal sector as well as the formal sector, and of course we also work with trade unions. And I think in most cases it's getting those three groups together, the governments, the trade unions and the employers, to really try and tackle this area around informality. I think though we're also heading into a whole new field of informality as a result of technology and the platform economy and the gig economy and so on. And as I indicated in my earlier intervention, the need for us to ensure that we've got standard protections and through government intervention, that we have standard protections to all workers in the traditional informal economy, in the new informal economy, so that progressively they are able to shift across. But I'll just say there is no one strategy. It's needs to be a combined effort between those three players in the economy, the governments, the workers and employers.
Anyone else? Are there any insight from Vietnam for this?
So I think there is challenges around the casualisation of workforces right across economies around the world, and certainly it's a challenge in Australia as well, and particularly when we think about, you know, ensuring income stability and access to finance and ensuring that people have the right workplace health and safety requirements to ensure that they can do their work well and do it safely. And so I think it's these sorts of challenges that, you know, we're grappling with right across the world, and I guess where the challenges come from the institutional environment, in that it's very much still designed around a permanent 9-to-5, 40-hour week employment, and that doesn't always reflect the reality of our workforces, and so there's two possible strategies in moving forward around this. There's the formalisation of current informal lines of work, or there's the adaptation of existing regulatory and institutional structures to support these more informal lines of work.
Next question. This is also for ILO. Let's change. Toby first. Okay. While Toby said that an increase in automation will increase productivity, won't it also reduce permanent 40-hour weeks jobs and increase underemployment?
I hope not. Look, it's a great question, and of course it's the question that's on everyone's mind. Actually, the first thing I would just say, and I think this relates a little bit to questions about informality and the labour law, is that we shouldn't necessarily aspire for a workforce full of permanent 40-hour-a-week jobs as well. One of the problems that Indonesia has is that there is no formal model for part-time work, which is a real barrier to bringing more women into the workforce and providing people with more flexible working arrangements. So I think that's the first thing, is just we shouldn't necessarily have that as a fixed aspiration because the nature of work has changed. But look, I understand the anxiety in this question, but I think it comes from the risk is when we think about jobs and job losses in automation is that we have a fixed view of the tasks that are in one job. So we say, here's the job, we take away that task, suddenly the job is smaller, and over time the job gets automated away. But that's not actually what happens, because jobs are much more dynamic than that. What actually happens is that jobs change over time. Let me give you an example of this from Indonesia. And to go back to our discussion about unicorns, you'll be happy to hear it's a Gojek example. So we did a case study on Gojek that's in the report. And some of you might remember that Gojek started actually before smartphones were widespread in Indonesia. And it was a phone booking service. So you would call up a call center and say, oh, I need a rider. And then the call center would call around some riders until they found someone who was available. Extremely manual process.
Next question.
It took up to 20 minutes to match bookings in peak hour. And they had 80 workers in this call center, just taking bookings, processing bookings. Gojek was a bit smaller back then. So smartphones came along, technology improved, they were able to automate that entire booking process, which was a huge improvement in quality. So they went from filling bookings in 20 minutes to filling bookings in a few seconds. And you might assume 80 call center working jobs no longer required. But that's not at all what's happened. In fact, Gojek today employs 800 people in its call centers providing customer service. They're not matching bookings. They are doing more complex, more uniquely human work that the algorithm can't do. They're taking customer complaints. They're helping onboard new service providers onto the platform. And we see this in lots of different occupations. There was a question in the last session about, should I give up being an accountant because some of that work's going to be automated? Don't. I mean, what we'll see is that accountancy will evolve. It will be less about the manual and the routine, as Arif said, but it will be much more about creative problem solving, complex information synthesis, more complex interpersonal interactions. So we need to realize that the loss of one task or tasks in a job does not spell the end of that job, because we know from history that jobs evolve and change over time. And oh, look, a chart has just appeared to demonstrate that point for you. This is some of the results of the work that we've been doing in looking at Indonesia's automation over the last 15 years. So how has that changed the tasks that Indonesians are performing at work? And we see exactly what Arif was talking about, which is there's this reduction in routine, repetitive types of work, which you can see on the left-hand side of that chart, of about 5.5 hours per week since 2000. So it's quite significant. That's almost a whole day in the average Indonesian's working week. But it's been replaced. It's been replaced by new tasks that are more complex, that are more uniquely human, that are much harder and more difficult and more expensive to automate. Complex interpersonal interactions, using technologies. The actual use of technology itself has gone from being almost insignificant as a task in the Indonesian economy in 2000 It's extra 2 hours a week for the average Indonesian worker. So we're seeing it's not just a reduction in the amount of tasks, but a shift in the type of tasks from that routine, repetitive, automatable work, which is often boring and often also more dangerous, to more complex, more uniquely human work.
Oke, thank you. Boleh kasih tepuk tangan untuk para narasumber kita? Next question, Ms. Nagaki. We also have passed that we look forward to become one sovereign country like other country. Do you still think, or what do you think about if we try to adopt Japan model or South Korean model to grow as an industrial nation?
Well, I'm not so sure whether adopting now the Japan model or South Korea model would work. Obviously, we mentioned about some of the lessons learned from what all these countries have gone through to come up to that stage of growth, but it doesn't mean that it's just to adapt as it is, because these countries have gone this kind of several stages of growth, starting from the more of the consumption-based growth to now there's a new technology coming up, is the adoption, the imitation of this technology. And now several of these countries are between that stage, and the next stage is really the innovation-based growth. So now if Indonesia wants to accelerate that growth, I think it's very much about nurturing its own domestic capability to integrate but nurture technology and innovation system. And this is actually a lot of that the government is trying to do on boosting research and developments through tax reductions for the companies, now putting university and industry linkages is much closer, so that you nurture innovation through this partnership. It's again tax regulations, incentives to go to the firms so that they provide also a skills training for their workers. And that could be in the larger companies, that could be in the small companies, and some of these we're talking about informal sectors also. I'm not saying that all the workers in the informal sector will become suddenly technology, sort of driven, savvy people. But at least in the area that they will be working, is there any way to have a more sort of competency-based, even short-term, specific skills that they could acquire? So it's all about adoptions of putting the sort of system of climate so that to boost that incentives, awareness and capabilities for adopting these technology innovations in the country. At the same time, as I say at the beginning, still can we open up to the outside world? This morning, I think Papa Mentri was also mentioning about, for instance, opening up for foreign universities or foreign educations to bring some knowledge to their countries. It's still maybe useful, and it's how to embrace that knowledge that is coming. And then finally,
meaning that we embrace the possibility cross-nation workers.
Cross-nation workers,
yeah,
whenever it's feasible and applicable. And at the same time, it's really to nurture the capabilities at the local levels, the firms together with universities, education institutions, to come up with an ecosystem that everybody is embracing. We don't say human capital, right? People-centered system and policy that comes from the national government and the local government, the private sectors, and the firms, and then the beneficiaries as well.
So you said that relocation people from different countries to become a worker is not inevitable. in the future, because it's quite sensitive
regulations,
issues in,
exactly.
in Indonesia when there's an employment here, or while government or other stakeholders bring the partners, foreign partners to Indonesia, and somehow they also bring their workers here instead of
employing the local. I think it's much more for the partnership and transfer of knowledge, whatever it's possible. And it's also in the international education. This really the universities' educations to be really open up to have more partnership with the local institutions here. So I think this is really more about this openness that wherever is applicable, I think it could be explored.
Does ILO agree with that? About the migrant workers that works not only in their country but also in foreign countries also.
Yeah, I think I mean labour migration is one of the big challenges as well facing so many countries, and it's labour migration again not just in its traditional form but also as we're seeing the changes in work particularly brought about by technology. There is now so much not only cross-border work but borderless work as well, and so the whole question of where somebody works and where they live is not the direct equation necessarily that it used to be. And that's an area that so far is, I think, arguably completely under-regulated and under-protected. In terms of standard migration or traditional forms of migration, I think we have seen a massive increase in that over recent years, and to the benefit of the people involved in most cases who are seeking better economic circumstances or better opportunities. Most often it's in the benefit to the country that are receiving the migrants, because they, generally speaking, are there to fill skill gaps to meet demands in the labour market, and for the country that they're leaving from, their home countries, it's often advantageous to them in terms of the remittances that come back or arrangements from other agreements. So there's lots of dimensions to the labour migration issue. But I think the key to it really is to ensure that in the field of labour migration there are proper bilateral agreements between governments as to how this is to be regulated, proper understandings between receiving governments and the foreign or the international companies that are coming to work in those countries. I don't think it's necessary, it's not necessarily a difficult problem, it's just one that's not thought through properly by all parties at the start. Sometimes when we're talking about foreign investment, for example, the recipient country is just so pleased to be receiving this sort of investment, they don't necessarily think what some of the implications could be. But they're not, or they shouldn't be, the challenges that they are in many cases.
Oke, ada pertanyaan lagi? Oke. Kemampuan otomasi dan programming membutuhkan akses internet dan skills. Apakah Indonesia tidak hanya Jawa siap di tantangan industri 4.0 ini, sementara hanya 68,6% mengakses internet? Arif bisa menjawab barangkali. You can answer in English or in Bahasa. The ability of automation and programming needs internet and internet access and skills. While Indonesia only have like 68.6% access to internet. Probably Mr. Brennan also want to join the answer the question.
Okay, maybe I will try to answer first from my personal experience. I believe that I was born in Bali, the north part of Bali. It's actually a very, very small city, and during my high school time there, the internet connection there is very, very bad. When I want to learn about programming, I need to go to the game center and actually learn programming there, or I need to like stay up late at home using the DSL connection, beep, 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 this kind of thing. They're very, very slow. And I need to stay up like from 12 midnight until like 5 a.m. in the morning, and then I pass school next day. But that's actually how I get to the access to the internet. But I believe it's very, very important to be able to have the access to the internet. I think the numbers of 68.6% of access might be more, how to say it, might be more related to the intent of the people to access it rather than the availability of the infrastructure. Because I believe now, if I don't know, if I saw the main Kominfo presentation, I think the infrastructure access is already there. It's mainly more about the intent of the people to access, and then the knowledge of people to access and do the reading and everything. Because I think that's also another problem of Indonesian, because I think now we are number 2 in terms of illiteracy rate from bottom. Yeah, so we are very, very under literate. Don't have any patience to reading, I think. Yeah, so. Yeah, it's very relevant to the capability to access the internet. So more and more people need to be able to access the internet. But I think the problem is more to the intent rather than the infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay. Second one, for ILO, how to tackle inequalities, especially ensuring fair sharing profit in the new era or new form of employment relation.
ILO gets all the easy ones, doesn't it? Look, inequality is, again, one of these global problems that has just got incredibly worse over the last decade or so. And I think there are a number of reasons for it, and I think we need to better understand the reasons before we can find the solution to it. But I do think that a large part of the cause of this has been through the role of governments in properly withdrawing from, if you like, the social contract, or properly committing to the social contract in terms of looking at fair systems of taxation and regulation of industry and of individuals as well. I think we've also seen over that same period of time a lack of, or a reduction in the influence and representation of trade unions, who in many cases hold enterprise, and where a lot of this inequality arises from, they hold them accountable, as to an extent do employer organisations, which have also lost a lot of the influence. And so as the market has become freer, as individuals are freer to act in their own interest, unfortunately too many of them have done just that, and forgetting what their obligations are to the people who create that wealth for them, to the societies that they live in, and so on. And so there needs to be a fundamental, almost ethical discussion about this situation, I think, and governments have a significant role to play in it. We see quite often that when we're talking about inequalities, those in that top 0.1% who own so much of the world's wealth are also the ones that don't pay taxes, the ones that don't make other contributions to society, and there really is a role for governments as well as us, as well as communities, to start to take better care of this, and to ensure that there are appropriate workplace practices that facilitate a much more just sharing of the profits of companies and the other wealth in companies.
Okay. The question for ILO, I think you only the one who... Okay, next question. In your experience and opinion, aside from the government, how much investment and work have the industries and schools put in towards future skills needed? And the questions for you, I think. Yeah.
So I can speak from an Australian experience, and I think in Australia we're seeing a lot of industries transitioning to become more knowledge and technology intensive, particularly some of our traditional industries like manufacturing and mining. And I think some of the challenges that these industries are facing in transitioning and in transitioning their workforces is in attracting future talent and particularly attracting technology and digital skilled individuals to their workforces to adapt to the new needs and the new demand that these industries have. And so some of these industries are responding by, I guess, communicating some of the new career and occupation opportunities that are available, particularly engaging quite early on, so engaging with students in primary school and early education to really communicate the new ways in which the industry is evolving, the new sorts of career options that are available for people, providing those personal narratives so that people can envisage what a career would look like and make the decision around whether that's a desirable career pathway for them or not. And I think equally importantly is the need to, I guess, address and attract some of the skill challenges across all levels of the education sector. And so I think particularly from a STEM skills perspective, we can really utilise the innate curiosity that many young people have in early education and develop ways in which to utilise that innate curiosity to support some of these emerging technology-enabled occupations.
And opinion aside from the government, how much investment and work have the
just to add on that question about investment, we're talking about investment from industry and schools, and I think this is a real challenge for Indonesia. We all read last week or heard the president in his vision speech prioritising Tibet as critical part of the reform agenda in Indonesia over the next 5 years. But securing that contribution and participation of industry will be essential. I mean, if you look at successful Tibet systems around the world or around the region, Malaysia, for instance, has probably a more successful system. It's built on really strong industry participation in curriculum development and in delivery, and we're just not seeing that at the moment in Indonesia. I think one of the most disturbing statistics from our research, which is probably well known to you, is that only 8% of Indonesian businesses have formal on-the-job training programs at the moment, which is one of the lowest rates in the region. So increasing industry's contribution to the skills system will be really critical to lifting the quality of skills and getting the investment that's required. And there are lots of reasons, and I talk about some of the reasons why industry is not investing. The labour law is, again, a part of that problem, the restrictiveness of the labour law. But there's also, I think, not sufficient understanding in the Indonesian businesses of the importance of on-the-job training and the contribution that they can make to Tibet. And there's also a restrictive regulatory environment that prohibits, in a lot of cases, people coming from industry to teach Tibet courses in vocational schools because they're not qualified formally as teachers. So there are a whole bunch of barriers that I think will need to be unpicked, because getting more investment from industry will be critical to lifting the quality of Tibet in Indonesia. Please.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, because I think this is a very important discussion and this important point. I agree with you with the challenges. I think there are certain very good local initiatives that's happening, and we can't expect that from the small and medium sized companies, but relatively large companies or SOEs, for instance, they have also the responsibility to contribute to the local economy or local industries development. So starting from there, and since we get the incentive in any case, and we've seen that. We've seen some of the companies obviously providing skills training, even for the skills training for the future to the employees. They also get some students from the nearby SMKs, the secondary vocational schools, to do that. So this kind of local initiative that can, so regulation be taken out and can be nurtured more and more, because at the end of the day, our skills needs, the national structure is important, but actually what's happening is really at the local level also, how skills needs are changing from the the local sort of industries point of view, I think it's maybe to start from there. Yes, from below also, while you have the national Tibet sort of structures that's coming out. So I think it's both. And then on the quality of the skills training, I also agree that without the training quality assured, it's pointless to have a sort of cost-sharing mechanism. So the most important thing is really whether government, when it comes to regulations of cost-sharing or training, there will be a much more accountability for results. So it means that the quality of the training should be ensured. Now, from the company side, you can say, oh yeah, okay, we train 20 people, but I changed my mind, I'm not going to employ them. This should not happen. So unless and until there's a certain accountability for this result can be crafted out, it's not going to work. So this is something that I guess it would be a good recommendations for the governments that are now planning for this cost-sharing mechanism between government, national government, local government, tax incentives, industries, and the technical vocational schools, polytechnics, or universities.
Okay. Next questions. In this hyper-speed changes of technological advancement, it only makes powerful companies more powerful. For example, Google or Facebook. How to break things up and prevent the damage? You, please.
Okay, it's a very interesting question. Actually, I just read also, I think in one of the Silicon Valley publication, that in the past like 5 or maybe for the next 10 years, most of the R&D investment in technology mainly monopolized by all the big companies, especially Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft. Those are the key companies that usually invest a lot. Those, for example, in AI, they are the ones that invest a lot. Those also have the benefits of the initial advancement in the technology, so they will be becoming more and more powerful. I think the key point is that I think for us as Indonesian, or maybe in the relevance of the topic, thinking about the future jobs, I don't think it's our place to think about how to break them, or because the conclusion of the article is that it's very hard for
collaborate or cut off, collaborate with them or cutting off everything from them and become solely independent.
I heard very echo in it, so I didn't.
Jadi ini kita mau kerjasama sama mereka atau kita yaudah deh kita boykot aja deh Facebook sama Google. Ada orang Facebook sama Google?
Yeah, I think that's
bilang-bilang ya.
So I think the mungkin pakai bahasa Indonesia jadi sorry, I think it's English. I think the key point is that I want to say that it's up to us to get the benefits and try to distract away from the less benefits. For example, because of Google, now we are able to have an access to all the fast knowledge in the world. Because of Facebook, now we are more connected to people that are far away from us. So that's a very, very strong benefit. But if we are inclined to the bad side of things, like because of Facebook, now we have more time spent doing unproductive things, then that's our fault, I think. So in general, I think we need to invest on the mindset of the society to incline toward the more productivity things rather than the less benefit things. Actually, I just read also, I think in one of the Silicon Valley publication.
I agree with what Arif said. This is a really tough question. It's a good question, and it's a question that governments around the world are wrestling with. Australia's Competition and Consumer Commission at the moment is undertaking a world-first inquiry on how to change competition regulation to better regulate these increasingly kind of monopolistic platforms. So, and hopefully that will come up with some innovative ideas. I think, to go back to your question of whether to collaborate or cut ourselves off, I think collaboration is the answer. Because I think the benefits still outweigh the costs, and I don't think
cutting ourselves off. And you know, there are ways to do that with very restrictive national data laws, and I know Indonesia has at times explored kind of really pulling down the curtains on some of the market access for these large global tech companies. I don't think that that serves Indonesia's interests. I think it would hurt competitiveness and productivity. I think that, and I also think that, as I said, it's very hard for one country to address some of these challenges around these global platforms and competition. I think the best thing to do is to collaborate with them domestically, but then to collaborate internationally with the US and the EU and other countries that are wrestling with these same questions. And I think the best way to solve that competition aspect of the problem...
Sorry to cut you, but we have China examples. We have China.
Yeah.
How you answer that?
Allowing Chinese... Sorry?
China cut off with the Google and Facebook also, right?
Yeah, and that's a strategy that they've adopted and has been successful to them, but I'm not sure it's a strategy that anyone else could have adopted and been successful at it. I think trying to adopt industrial policy from China is a bit of a risky business. There are obviously some unique features of that market, given its enormous size and its technical and capacity. You're right, you know, that they've adopted a different path, but I don't think that path is the right one for Indonesia. You're right, you know, they've adopted a different path.
Okay, next questions. Okay, next this is already asking, right? Skills training is needed and burden cost sharing is important, but training quality is a challenge. Skills training is needed and burden cost sharing is important, but training quality is a challenge, and there is need for accountability, how to deal underperformance of providers. Already. On 11th SDGs, what are the strategy leverage automation, especially to reduce adverse environmental impact resulted from manufacturing industry? Nope.
I think with the transition and we're seeing the transition that we're seeing with the manufacturing industry, both here in Indonesia but also in other countries, is it's very much responding to this increased need to do more with less. Many economies are facing challenges around energy, around access to natural resources, around water, and other pressure points. And I think there's opportunities to think a bit more holistically about how we transition, transform, and develop these sectors, including manufacturing, particularly when it comes to looking at the supportive ways in which we can develop more circular approaches to resource management and resource use and recovery, and how there could be opportunities to not only reduce the environmental impacts that resource use currently has on our environment, but also the economic potential that comes from these sorts of investment and initiatives. Particularly in Australia, we see that investment in resource recovery can provide both these environmental and economic dividends in terms of job creation opportunities and new industries being born from these new drivers and supply. So I think that by taking this more holistic approach, by looking at the entire supply chain and life cycle of the manufacturing industry, we can address the pressure points at each end.
Okay, this is the very last question, okay? Very last question. For ILO, world of work is changing. Industrial relation also shifting to new pattern that never existed previously. How ILO will anticipate to build the labor standard reform? Good question.
It is a very good question. Let me answer this in three parts. The first part is, when we're talking about, and I assume this is what's meant here by the reference to labour standards reform, I assume we're talking about international labour standards, which are international law that provide that base for member states who ratify them. The ILO, it's our 100th birthday this year. We've been around for a century, and over that period of time we have developed 200 or thereabouts international labour standards, international conventions, covering virtually every aspect of work. Most of those were created in the 1920s, 30s and 40s, and so in many cases are now quite out of date, as you can imagine. We have over the last 2 years introduced a process of a review mechanism, what we call a tripartite review mechanisms, which means it's governed by governments, trade unions and employer organisations, of going through all of those conventions to see which of those are still up to date, which ones are no longer relevant, and which ones need to be further developed to be brought up to state, so up to current state. So we are very conscious of the fact that we've got a body of international law and the need to make sure it is still relevant today. The second part of the answer is we are also in the process of developing a number of new international conventions. The first of which was just approved by the International Labour Conference 3 weeks ago, and this is the first ever global regulation against violence and harassment in the workplace, particularly gender-based violence and harassment in the workplace. So that one has been approved. The next one on our list for a new convention, subject to it being approved by our members, is one around decent apprenticeships. There's always been some sort of regulation around apprenticeships, but we have seen that it has decreased over the years, the relevance of it has decreased over the years, and so what we want to do is try and introduce some new, again, international, some global safety nets around apprenticeships, and very much based on this challenge of youth employment, of training providers, and these sorts of things. And then the third aspect is, or the third part of the answer is looking to the future. Part of our work around the future of work that we're doing in conjunction with a large number of our member states and with our other partners is to really identify what are the shortcomings that are creating the instability, that are creating the inequalities in the world of work. And particularly, I think, around how do we address things like the gig economy? How do we address the new forms of work that have a very vague employment relationship, if any, but people are still working? So how do we make sure we've got a system of global regulation in place that is there for governments at a national level to build on? So we are actively, as I say, operating on the basis of reviewing all of our old conventions. We have a current program of new conventions and a program in place to identify what are going to be the priorities for laws for protection of workers going into the future as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And I also invite all the speakers to give final remarks since the time is up. First from you, probably.
Okay, thank you. Maybe two things which are a bit different from the first thing is it's a bit on maybe on education technologies. We're talking about the impact of technologies and the automations on jobs and underemployment in employment, or maybe new job. At the same time, I was wondering whether we could do more to leverage the use of technology to improve the teaching and learning. And I think you're talking about what is important for the younger generation is what some stakeholders would call the 4 C's, or the people who could be more creative, could have critical thinking, more communications, and then what was the number 4 is a collaboration or cooperations. And there's a lot of things that can used to be, and we could do face-to-face, or we could do some blended learning. But nowadays, there's a lot of this search, or it's a combination between the best information, technologies, combined with the learning science, what you call the neurosciences, to come up with learning platform or even product that can be used for the new generation of people. So it's really how you leverage technologies into that. And maybe it is not necessary to have high-speed internet on that, there may be some other low-cost technology that can be used. And this is something that raising awareness for the use of such type of technology for more cutting-edge teaching and learning would be good. The second thing is slightly different, but I think it's the right moment for Indonesia, and there's a lot of drive for reform. So what we are now, because I think the last question was what governments and development partners and private sector can do together. So now, as ADB, we are also embarking in a new 5 years country partnership strategy that actually embraces all what now we have been discussing now. One is in how to work together to boost the competitiveness, to come with a more domestic innovation capability for the innovations, more complex manufacturing and industries. And second part is the investment in people, so the well-being of people, starting from health services, nutrition, and improve educations, and then skills for the job market. And thirdly, as we have seen in this country, in the region also, is resilience towards environment and any other natural disasters and so on. So those are the three pillars that I think we are coming up to work with the governments and then the stakeholders. So we are really looking forward to, actually it's a very good discussion here, so that we, and then what's the next? We have to take actions, right? Is the implementation will be the key.
Thank you. Mas Arif?
From it, if the general question is, my key point is three. The first one is that I think we need to reform our educational system, as Ms. Eko mentioned also, by using technology to democratize access to education. That's the first point. The second one, I think, is we need to improve the quality of food that the Indonesian people takes, mainly for the protein level, because as I think that generally people are not really knowledgeable about the gizi, the protein level of food, but so they prefer to buy try to buy expensive food like beef or maybe fried chicken or anything. But actually we have tempe. Tempe is actually the highest density protein in food. Highest protein density in food, and also we have a lot of fish. I think by doing a protein revolution and giving more access to high protein food to our next generation, it's also help improving their brain capacity. And the third one is with 260 million population, I think we have a lot of high intellectual individual in Indonesia, and one of the keys also how most of them are now overseas. One of the key point I think is how to bring them back and think about the Indonesian complex problem, because the jobs problem, the future jobs problem in Indonesia is very complex, because on each city or maybe each area they have a different problem. So we need more brain power to solve it all together. So bringing them back is also one of the key points. I think that's. Thank you.
Is it fine?
Just some brief comments, I think. As we've all commented on, I think, and everybody in the room, I'm sure, acknowledges that we are facing a period of unprecedented change, not only in the extent of the change, but also the pace of the change. But we would also argue, the ILO would also argue, that we're in a period of unprecedented opportunity, that most of this change can provide real opportunities for human growth, for global growth, for more comfortable and safer, better lives for all people. But the thing is, we've got to take the action to ensure that that happens. We can't be subservient to climate change. We've got to do something about avoiding climate change. We can't be subservient to technology and artificial intelligence. We've got to be on the front foot and directing it. We can't just give in to the unfair distribution of the benefits that are being produced all around the world, the inequalities that have been created and sustained all around the world. We've really got to get onto the front foot and deal with these sort of issues. We certainly do have to address the whole issue of young people in particular, but not only young people, and training for work. We've got to ensure that there is a much greater relationship between industry, between governments, and between training and service providers to ensure that we are planning well in advance, that we're providing well-funded, sustainable and high-quality education systems from young age and right through working age as well. And I think to conclude where I started, we really do need to think about the future of work as a human-centred, a people-centred future of work, where we've got to ensure that that is the #1 consideration when we're talking about environmental policies, when we're talking about social policies, when we're talking about financial policies, and when we're talking about more general economic policies. There needs to be a shift in thinking, and if we can make that shift in thinking, there is a tremendously positive opportunity, I think, for all people across the world.
Ms. Norton?
So I think this panel discussion has continued to highlight how technology is shaping our workforce in a way that, you know, it's emphasising the aspects of us as workers that are uniquely human, rather than racing against the machine. We're racing with it and using technology to leverage our own human capabilities, moving more into the routine, more into the non-routine, the complex, the more ambiguous spaces. If we think about what a machine can and cannot do, it cannot love, it cannot show compassion, it cannot deal well with uncertainty. It might be able to analyse data, but it can't tell us what to do with that information. These are areas where we're going to increasingly play in the future of work, and it's where our strengths are. And so when thinking about future employment, it's about understanding and building those capabilities and skills in those uniquely human areas, as that's where the future job creation opportunities will be.
Thank you, Alfredo, and thank you for hosting the session as well. I know I've spoken a lot today about the benefits of automation, and I think, you know, our research shows that automation can become a much more significant driver of economic growth for Indonesia over the next decade. And in fact, that will be critical as the contribution of labour force growth to GDP slows in Indonesia. Automation will be essential to maintaining growth and prosperity, I think. And one of the other striking findings from our research is that for the individual workers who are able to adapt to automation, their incomes actually grew twice as fast as well as workers who didn't experience automation. So automation is not only good for national income, but it can be good for individual workers' incomes as well. But I just want to finish on a cautionary note as well, and I know Greg has spoken very eloquently today about the need for inclusive growth. Can I get up one last slide? It's got lots of bubbles on it. In my slides.
The slide,
here we go. That one there, yeah. Whilst automation does generate benefits, our research also found that those benefits are not equally distributed across the workforce. And I think this is a really important challenge for governments, how to make sure that this process of automation is inclusive. So we looked at a range of different cohorts of workers. We looked in terms of gender, formality, skill level, and age as well. And there were some really stark differences in how workers' incomes grew in response to automation. And so the height of the bubble indicates the growth. So from lowest growth on the left-hand side to the highest growth on the right-hand side, you can see some really stark differences. So, you know, on the whole, older workers experience much less benefit from automation, and lower skilled workers experience significantly less benefit from automation as well. So while there were definitely great potential in automation for Indonesia, the government will need to ensure that the growth that is generated from automation is inclusive, and that will mean relying on, you know, new policies in areas like social protection. And I think it's interesting, we've talked a lot about youth unemployment today, but actually when we think about automation, often the group that suffers or is least able to benefit is the elderly, who are least able to make these transitions. So I just leave you on that note to think about inclusive growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby, to summarize our discussion today. Berikan tepuk tangan untuk para speakers kita hari ini. Mudah-mudahan yang terbaik buat Indonesia. Terima kasih IDF atas kesempatan ini. Selamat petang. Saya serahkan kembali ke MC. Terima kasih.
And before leaving the stage, all speakers and moderator, please pose together for a photograph. Thank you very much. All speakers and moderator, please pose together for a photograph. Thank you very much. We would like to extend our gratitude to all speakers and moderator for sharing their expertise and views in this session. So ladies and gentlemen, we are now concluding day 1 of the Indonesia Development Forum 2019. Tomorrow morning, the first session in this assembly hall will be Imagine Plenary Special Session East Nusa Tenggara. Will begin at 8:30 a.m. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow morning. Nusa Tenggara will begin at 8:30 a.m. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow morning.